Here.
Mr. Steeman?
Here.
Ms. Nesset?
Here.
Dr. Malaker?
Here.
Mr. Daly? Mr. Daly?
We're anticipating Mr. Daly being here in Fargo, but he hasn't shown up yet.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Ryan?
Here.
Mr. Ness?
Here.
Mr. Hacker? Mr. Wakeford?
Wakeford's here.
Dr. Bruce?
Yep, here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have an agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Any discussion of the agenda?
Moved
Kevin
by
Melker, so moved.
Casey.
Second. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Dr. Malaker?
Yes.
Mr. Daly? Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Yes. Do we have a motion to approve the March 28th meeting minutes? Move
Moved Casey. Second.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Yeah, we're good.
Second. There's a second. Kevin Melker seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Daly? Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker? Dr. Malaker?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Yes. Item number 3, President Emeritus, who's going to talk to us about that?
I'll do that. Chairman, Chancellor's in the Emerging Technologies Working Group meeting with Governor Schaefer and others, and so I'll step in and do these next few items here.
That'd be great. Thank you.
This first item is to bestow President Emeritus status on Dr. Gary D. Hagan. You have the letter that was sent detailing his time in Mayville State with distinction since 1976. He is recommended for this by no less than 5 of his staff, and the Chancellor concurs with that. On the other side of the letter is requesting the State Board of Higher Education bestow the title of First Lady Emerita on Debbie Hagan, who served as First Lady of Mayville State for 12 years. Part of that fabric of Mayville State since 1976, volunteering countless hours and doing great things for Mayville State University. So with that, Chancellor approves, and it just remains for a motion and approval.
Thank
Chancellor
you.
Morton.
Yes.
This is Casey. I would move approval for President Gary Hagan and his wife Debbie.
Second, Steeman.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? I would just offer that behind every successful man is a woman rolling her eyes.
True in this case.
This is very well deserved, and we are deeply indebted to the entire family, and this is a great way to recognize them. Any further discussion?
I would wholeheartedly approve.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, call for the vote, please.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset? Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Malaker?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Daly, are you on yet? Board Chair
Not
Morton?
yet. Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Good. Congratulations.
Congratulations, Gary.
Gary. Well deserved.
Yeah.
Okay, well, move to item number 4, UND mission statement.
Yes, Chairman Morton, the University of North Dakota has revised its mission statement and requests State Board of Higher Education approval. As part of the planning process, they developed a new mission statement following a campus-wide shared governance process. And it is very, very simple. to provide transformative learning, discovery, and community engagement opportunities for developing tomorrow's leaders. And the Chancellor approves, and it remains simply for the board to propose a motion and approve.
Chairman Morton, this is Casey. I would move approval of the revised UND mission statement.
Thank you, Casey. Is there a second?
Second.
A second, Kevin Melliker. Any discussion?
Board
This
Chair,
is Casey
the only
again.
discussion-
I think it's very nice that it is very succinct, and the old mission statement was much too cumbersome, and this is really a good move for UND.
Thank you, Casey. Kevin?
I was just going to add on to what Casey said. It's one of the few times in the 4 years that I've been involved where I've seen less wording instead of more wording. So congratulations and job well done.
Further discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Yes. Item number 5. SBHE appointments.
Yes, sir. Chairman, appointments to State Board of Agricultural Research and Education, the SBHE. There are 4 people we're talking about here, and the first proposed action is to reappoint Lance Gullison to a second 4-year term on the State Board of Agricultural Research and Education beginning 1 July 2018, representing southeastern North Dakota, and to appoint Julie Zickman to a 4-year term on the State Board of Agriculture Research and Education beginning July 1, representing northeastern North Dakota. You have the background, and the Chancellor recommends approval.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
Chair Morton, this is Greg. I would move approval.
Casey, second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Yes. I see there's an A and a B to 5, the North Dakota Ag Coalition and the Extension and Ag Research. Do these have to be voted on too?
Yes, sir. So, Chairman, appointment to State Board of Agriculture Research and Education. The proposed action is a motion to appoint Mark Birdsall and Doug Bickler, or Bitchler, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it, to 4-year terms on the State Board of Agricultural Research and Education beginning 1 July 2018. Chancellor recommends approval.
Can we take both of
Move
these
approval,
together?
Casey.
Mr.
Second.
Chairman, you already did the first one, so this is just the second.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Yes. SBHE Governance Report. We'll start with Kathy.
Good morning, Chair Morton, and good morning from Minot State University. I'd like to give our governance report. We did meet on April 20th. I'll go through the highlights of the agenda that we acted upon. Chancellor evaluations, we're continuing to work on those. We're steadily moving forward with progress. We're about 90% complete with the work on the Chancellor evaluation process. We'll have it to the board at the May meeting, which will fall in line for the work that needs to be done immediately following that. On our agenda was the Blackboard issue. Unfortunately, Darren King had a family issue. His dad was very ill. We'll send our condolences. His father has since passed away. So Darren King, we're thinking about you. Darren did follow up with an email later on. IT is continuing to work ahead and not extend Blackboard any further at this point, but working to, gather solutions to any of the difficulties that they were having. Right now, they are making progress with Blackboard. There was an item also brought up regarding restructuring within the system and the system office. This was discussed. I will say that, we continue to work through on the governance and through the state board with two-year colleges. Presidential evaluations have been moved to the fall. There's different items that continue to get worked through. SB 2003, Vision 2030. So there's a lot of work that's being done, but that was also discussed. We discussed new member orientation. So for board orientation, we were talking about we will continue with the process we put in place last year, and Carol Redmond helped with that, and we'll go ahead and maybe strengthen our mentorship program a bit so that there's better communication between existing board members and new members. But we like the process we put in place, and the mentorship will be strengthened. And the final item we visited about was in Vision 2030. We're going to continue to work together on that, and many of our different task force that are in place will probably all come and culminate in Vision 2030, working with the Chancellor. So with that, Chair Morton, and any questions I'd be happy to take. Otherwise, the report is complete. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Any questions of Kathy?
And I'd like to add that Jerry Rostad is here if anybody does have questions on the Blackboard issue.
He's probably there even if there aren't questions about the Blackboard issue, correct? We'll move to the Audit Committee report. Greg?
Thank you, Chair Morton. Not nearly as exciting as Board Member Nessich. We met yesterday in an executive session, heard a state auditor's report on NDSU's preparedness, emergency preparedness plan. All things came out very well, both institutionally and state auditor's office were in agreement on everything. And so we, that was the extent of our action. Our attorney, Nick Vaughn, went through policy 3022, defining and outlining the audit committee's responsibilities. We heard from Laura Schrott as far as the ongoing internal audit progress, and that was the extent of our meeting.
Any questions of Greg? Thank you, Greg. Academic and Student Affairs, Chairman Mike Ness. Mike?
Chair Morton, I'll cover items 8 through 17. Actually, I'm going to turn this over to Lisa Johnson to cover most of those. Our first item was tenure, and she will talk about that process.
Mr. Morton, members of the board, my name is Lisa Johnson. I serve as the Director of Academic Affairs in the university system. 61 faculty members were recommended for tenure from the 11 colleges and universities. There's a process that vets these individuals. Letters of recommendation emerged from committees that reviewed those individuals, also accompanied by letters from the respective presidents. This actually requires board action, and I present them today for your review. As you can see in the documents that are supplied, any additional expenses associated with contracting with these individuals are drawn from the respective campuses. Board Policy 605.1 details parameters surrounding this as an academic appointment that does require your action today. And you can also see there the requirements for tenure involve scholarship and teaching, contribution to the discipline or profession through research and other scholarly professional activities. It requires a probationary period of 6 years and to be reviewed at least annually by the institution. That 6 years can be extended and can also, the continuous service requirement can also be waived in some circumstances. I present the 61 individuals for the board's consideration and actions recommendation for approval today.
Thank you. Is there a motion?
I would make that motion, Ms. Mike.
I'll second that, Casey.
Thank you. That's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
This is Casey, just for my education. Is this a legislated requirement that we have to approve tenure, or is this an NDUS requirement?
Mr. Morton and Board Member Casey Ryan, detailed in board policies, it is listed there specifically in 605.1 that it does require board action to approve those.
And Member Ryan, this is Nick Vaughn. It also flows from state statute as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Any questions? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Daly? Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Board Chair Martin?
Yes. Moving to item 9.
Mr. Chair, if it'd be okay, I'd like to back up to tenure and talk about an item that we discussed at our meeting. With our concerns with the budget where it is right now and possibly more cuts coming down and frozen salaries over the last few years, our committee talked for quite some time about tenure and where it's going. And what we will do at our next meeting is work on affirming tenure as support from the state board. We have some language to work on with this, but we think it is something that we can give to our faculty that will possibly not cost a lot of money. The last time we discussed this, there was some fear that we would take tenure away and start over completely. And in our meeting, we discussed that we needed to do some things to help our faculty or to retain our faculty. And this may be something that we can do with very little cost. So just a point of information.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions for Mike?
Not a question. This is Birgit. I have just a confirmation of it. I really want to thank Mike for bringing that up at the Academic and Student Affairs meeting. I appreciate that a lot, and I appreciate the conversation. I think it will send a very good signal to the faculty.
And as Mike mentioned, working on language, and so this will come up at a future meeting for approval.
That's the plan, that we will bring it to the May meeting for the board to look at.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay, you want to proceed to item number 10?
Okay, actually, items number 9 through 14 are new programs, and I will turn those over to Lisa to cover those.
Thank you, Mr. Ness. Mr. Morton, members of the board. So there are 6 new programs that have been proposed by the campus. At Mayville State University is a graduate certificate in online digital teaching, really to prepare K-12 instructors to teach in an online platform and enhance safety and security around that, supported by the education standards and practices board. From North Dakota State University is a certificate in minor in entrepreneurship, obviously responding to an ecosystem in their community of research. Scholarship, and so these respond well to that desire to develop entrepreneurship at the undergraduate level. From Valley City State University is a Bachelor of Applied Science in Management, generally a Bachelor of Applied Science, is for students who have a technical or vocational or technical degree, a 2-year degree, and so this layers on that management component that makes them more marketable and to be promoted within their organization with that management component. At Minot State University is a minor in fitness and wellness specialist, again, to help students, again, to minor at the undergraduate level. It helps those students prepare for certificates in national exams. It's the American Council on Exercise and the National Academy of Sports Medicine or the American College of Sports Medicine. From NDSU, item number 13 is related to item number 17. And that the Masters of Landscape Architecture is designed, if approved, to replace the 5-year degree, which is a Bachelor of Landscape Architecture. So the Bachelor was a 5-year undergraduate degree. If approved, that Master's would replace that at NDSU. At UND is a graduate certificate in counseling with a K-12 emphasis. This is a demand from the field, and the certificate is something that, if I remember right, is transcripted, and so certainly helpful to the K-12 in terms of meeting needs in that area. Moving on to organizational change, both coming in from Bismarck State College, in which we have President Scogan in the room. The first request is to separate the provost and vice president for academic and student affairs into the vice president for academic affairs and a vice president for student affairs position. Secondly is changing the structure from the Office of College Relations from the associate vice president for finance and operations to the president. And President Scogan's in the room as well if there are additional questions from the board. I addressed item 17, which is the termination at NDSU. If approved, that would terminate the bachelor's program to be replaced with a master's in the same general area.
Good. Any questions or comments?
Chair Morton, our committee met with Dr. Rothis on all of these and talked about each of them, and we support them, so I'd make a motion to approve items 9 through 17.
Is there a second?
This is Kevin, second.
Any further discussion?
Chair Morton, I don't know if it's rumor or not. I'm understanding that, and I congratulate Dr. Shirley. I understand he's going to double his duties as an instructor in the fitness and wellness specialist program. So I appreciate that.
Setting a good example for our presidents. Thank you. I would just one comment. The Microsoft campus in Fargo, if you've ever been there, the landscaping is really exceptional. Just very well done, and that was all done by NDSU landscape architect grads. A real credit to the program, I think. And a very powerful local example of what a great program that has been through the years and will continue to be. Harry, any further discussion?
Chair Morton, this is probably a question for Phil more than anybody else, because Phil's been involved with the Lumina Attainment Grant. Will any of these new programs help raise the bar of the attainment that we're trying to achieve in the state? And can we utilize those as new opportunities?
Chair Morton and Dr. Melliker, sure, it'll all go into the mix, okay, as we move this process forward. You know, these additions, it just shows how adaptable the campuses and the leadership is to this trend, which is not happening just here in this state, but all over. So, yeah, it'll absolutely go into the mix.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Daly? Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Yes. Thank you. Budget and Finance Committee, is Nick with us?
I don't believe Member Hacker is on the call. This is Tammy. He was going to be attending the first meeting of the Emerging Technologies Work Group this morning with legislators and businessmen, along with the Chancellor. So unless he's joined the call now, we had discussed it, and I'll take his items for him.
Thank you, Tammy. I forgot that. Yeah, I urged them to that would be a higher priority. So please go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm starting with item number 18, relates to the tuition model implementation plans. Budget Finance Committee has now heard and approved all of the implementation plans for moving to our new tuition model. There was a document added to the agenda late last evening that summarizes the plan. So we won't go through each one of them, but I did want to just walk you through a high-level summary, if that's okay, so that the board's fully aware of what we're all doing here.
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, First principle is that tuition will be charged per credit hour at a flat rate, assessed at either 12 or 13 semester hours. And if you're looking at the document, you can see what a summary of what institutions are doing. We've got 4 institutions that are going to be charging a per credit rate, 3 that are using a flat rate that's up to 12, a 12 credit flat rate. And one thing to point out is that there's been some changes so that that now includes online credits taken, where before in some cases it didn't include those credits. Those were on top of the flat rate. So that'll be good for students. One difference there is that at UND, the online credits count only for their on-campus students. If a student is full-time online, they will continue to pay per credit. Dickinson and NDSU are charging a flat rate at 13, including those online credits. And then Botno and Minot State are charging a flat rate after 12 credits, but then if the student is taking over 18, then they will begin to be charged per credit. So all institutions are complying with that principle. The next principle dealt with blending together tuition and non-mandatory fees, but also made an allowance that institutions could retain a separate distance education access fee, with the understanding that once we've got the model implemented, we will begin looking at how to phase out that distance education fee. According to the schedule, I'll point out where we're at. So we've got, there's one typo on this line. We've got 4 institutions, Botno, Williston, Mayville, and UND that merged all of their course fees into the tuition rate. Several other institutions that merged their fees with minimal exceptions for particularly high cost course fees that wouldn't be appropriate to spread across all students. So we've got several institutions in that category. And then another grouping was that all course fees that were merged into program fees, and that is at Wapaton. I do want to point out that in policy 805.3, which is on this agenda for a second read today, that all institutions retain their special course fees to cover things like transportation and admission to field trips or field experience costs, study abroad trips, and again, some music lessons, flight training costs that are exceptionally expensive and need to be applied on a per student basis. Then moving on to course fees, there have been, well, before I leave course fees, so you know, the number of course fees that's going away is in the hundreds across the system. So this will be a much more transparent, it's a move towards more transparency, so there'll be fewer fees that the students have to add on to their tuition rates, or the program fees that I'll mention in a minute here. So that's a great move on the part of all of our institutions. Program fees are also changing. We had 4 institutions, Bismarck, Williston, NDSU, and UND, that merged all of their program fees into tuition rates, so they will not have any program fees. At Wapaton and Minot, the number of program fees was reduced from 20, at Wapaton it was reduced from 20 to 10, and at Minot State it was reduced from 2 to 1. Botno, Lake Region, and Dickinson did retain their program fees, and at Valley City and Mayville, they currently don't use program fees, so they didn't have to do any work on that. Regarding distance access fees, all of the institutions retained their distance access fee. And again, that's something we will be looking at once the new model is implemented and we can determine the impacts of all of that to the institution. The next principle dealt with establishing on-campus and online tuition rates that are the same and use a residency factor. At several of our institutions, the majority of them actually, right now the online dollar rate is the same. So that is a change too. At one institution, UND, they have kept their online rates different, which means generally higher than their on-campus rates. So that's just the dollar rate charge. As far as residency factors, only BSC, Washington, Dickinson, and NDSU will be using online and on-campus rates that are residency-based, meaning the out-of-state students will pay a factor on top of the base rate. At Williston, Mayville, Valley City, and UND, only the on-campus rates are residency-based, so their online rates will not be residency-based. And then at Lake Region and Minot, they have both requested and presented business cases to retain their current tuition rate model, which means their tuition rates are not residency-based, and you pay the same rate regardless of residency at their institutions. The next principle allowed for differential tuition rates or adopting bands of rating that might be adopted for more high-cost programs. We've got 5 institutions that have adopted those rates. So they will have a base rate, then they will have rates for either special programs or special categories of programs that are more costly. And then the last principle talked about assessing tuition based on residency, and it established the factors of for out-of-state U.S. residents and the contiguous provinces of Manitoba and Saskatchewan, the rates could be no lower than 120% of the North Dakota resident rate. For international students, the rate factor can be no lower than 175% of the North Dakota rate. And then for Minnesota residents, it has to be it needs to be according to the established agreement. So the last page of the handout is a schedule that I will not go through in great detail because there's a lot of numbers on it, but it does show you the changes from the current rate factor that's being charged at the institutions and then the proposed factor that is in their tuition models. You'll see on that schedule, I've highlighted where there are exceptions to the principles that I just described. And I'll mention those. At Lake Region and Minot, they are charging the same rate regardless of residency. Except for Lake Region, they will be charging their international students at 250% of the base factor. Regarding contiguous states, there are a couple of exceptions at Valley City. They are charging their non-resident online rates at 125% versus the 175%. And then at Botno and Williston, they've got an exception for their Manitoba and Saskatchewan students that they will be charging them as the same rate as North Dakota students. And all of those exceptions, again, had business cases presented, and due to unique market conditions or program issues, the Budget Finance Committee thought it appropriate to approve those exceptions. So with that, I would take any questions on those implementation plans or look for a motion if the board so chooses to approve the implementation plans.
Any
Chair
questions?
Martin?
Yes.
Chair Martin, this is Nesset.
Please go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here from Minot, and I'll defer to President Shirley.
Thank you, Ms. Nesset. Chair Martin and Tammy, just want to correct so it's correct on the document. If you go back to the 3-page handout you just went through, on page 1, the very top right-hand quadrant, tuition model principle 1, under the implementation side, there's 4 bulleted areas. It's per credit, and then flat rate at 12, then flat rate at 13, and then it says flat rate after 12 per credit after 18. That word after should say at. It should be in line just like the others. So for Dakota College, Botno, and Minot State, it should say flat rate at 12 per credit after 18. And the little summary document that also went, the 7-page summary document for Minot State was incorrect as well. It's not flat rate from 13 to 18, it's flat rate from 12 to 18. So I just want to correct that for the record.
Thank you, Dr. Shirley.
Thank you, Steve. Any other discussion?
Chair Morton, this is
Chair
Greg.
Morton.
Yes.
I just want to echo Tammy's sentiments. The committee approved, and again, the exceptions are based on allowing our presidents at the institutional level to determine what's best for their market, their demographics, and how they can best provide, affordable to the proper people. So I just wanted to echo those sentiments that we did approve the plans.
Yes.
Chair
On that, yes, go ahead. Who's next?
Chair Morton, President Darling from Lake Region State College. Tammy, we had the Canadian provinces at 1.02.
1.0 also, right?
And in the document we submitted that the subcommittee approved.
At 1.0?
Yes.
Yes. Dr. Darling, we showed all of your rates across the board at 1.0 except for the international rate, which is 2.5.
Right, but Canada is international.
Yeah.
So we
okay.
had to,
okay. I see what you mean.
Yeah. So we had the Canadian provinces at 1.0.
Yeah. I apologize, Dr. Darling. That was our understanding. And it was the committee's understanding as well. So we'll make that change on the schedule.
Thank you.
Is Minot State, they had a similar relationship with Canada too. Is their wording correct?
Our wording is accurate on that part of the document.
Okay, any further discussion?
Board Chair,
Kevin?
I have a question on for Tammy, I guess, on the distance education learning costs. Tammy, can you give me some idea on? I read through the document, and not all campuses are charging that, but a few are. And what is the approximate cost from those campuses that are charging that fee?
Chair Morton and Member Melliker, it varies by institution. The last numbers that I had seen show rates from around, well, one institution it's $5.29. Most of them are in the 30 to 40 range. Nothing is over $50 per credit.
And that's per credit. And
yeah.
that's per credit hour, correct?
Yes, it is.
And with the change that UND is making, maybe UND can answer this, but where they're going with a company to help distribute their online education or help promote it or communicate better their offerings, how does that affect this?
Chair Melliker, if there's, I would defer to UND on the impact of that Pearson contract on this distance access fee.
Chairman Morton, this is Nancy Vogeltans at UND.
Please go ahead, Nancy.
I can't really answer this question for you, but I will make sure that we get a response for you. My understanding is that the distance education that will be supported by the Pearson management systems is a very small portion of what we do online, and whether or not those costs are differential, I can't really answer that question, but I will definitely find that out for you.
Okay, thank you.
This is Mark Kennedy, and thank you, Professor Vogeltans. I don't believe that particular access fee is going to be necessarily charged through Pearson. There will be fees related to student fees, and they, as as described by Tammy, will have differential pricing by program.
Okay, thank you.
Any other further discussion?
Chair Morton, I have a question.
Yes.
This is Mike Ness.
Go ahead.
This is a question for Tammy. This is the model that we'll be using. The tuition increases are up to the institutions. Will we see those before they are approved, or are they just approved because they can make that change? And I believe the legislature did not put a cap on this year.
Thank you for the question. Those increases that are related to this, yes, they are allowable by the legislation this year. Those were included in the annual budget guidelines that the board approved last meeting, I believe. And so those were in there, but I can certainly get you a schedule of all of them.
Okay, thank you.
And this is the Chancellor. Can I jump in?
Please do.
Yeah, I just stepped out of the meeting with former Governor Schaefer, so I might be back and forth. But back to Member Ness's point, they lifted any restrictions on graduate programs of law school, but I believe it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tammy, there was a limit for undergrad at 4%. Am I remembering correctly?
That's correct. That's correct, Chancellor.
Okay, just to clarify.
For
Thank you.
in-state students.
Any further discussion?
Chair Morton, this is Greg. I would make a motion for approval, which would include the specific adjustments that were addressed in discussion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Casey, second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? I would just add this. I think we live in a very dynamic time, whether it's innovation, whether it's budgets. And I think as a board, I think we just need to have the discussion. And then we have to evangelize and so people understand our discussion. But I do really agree with the governor when he talks about different organizations within the state acting like an enterprise rather than a state agency. And in order to act like an enterprise, you have to be innovative, you have to have flexibility. And I would like to see us really give the campuses flexibility to adjust tuition both in-state, especially out of state. Have the flexibility to do what's best for their campus, what's best for their growth. Out-of-state students are not an expense. Out-of-state students are an investment. We have fixed costs, and out-of-state students help us address those fixed costs. We have variable costs, and out-of-state students help us address those variable costs. And that's just and we can get good data and back it up. I just think if the campus had that type of flexibility, your borderline campuses could do a better job. I mean, they're doing a good job attracting out of state, but it could be better. And why not leverage that? And I'm going to be on record as promoting this. I'll take the hits from some of our conservative legislators who feel that out of state is an expense. And I'll gladly have the discussion. But I think as a board, I'd really like for us to really wrestle with this and come to a consensus. And it's just a basic thing of entrepreneurship, enterprise, giving leadership flexibility. They have the background, they have the training, they have the vested interest to grow their campuses. I don't see any downside, but that's another discussion for another day. With that, can we call the vote, please, Christy?
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Yes. So, are we to Board policy, item 28.
Chair Morton,
Jane?
though this is Tammy.
Okay.
Items 19 through 22 are master plan changes that Rick Tonder, that were addressed by Budget Finance Committee and approved. Rick Tonder is going to explain those for you.
Okay, we just voted on 18.
Just on 18, yeah. We still have
Okay.
19 through 27, sorry.
Okay. Trying to stay in schedule. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Chair Morton, members of the committee, this is Rick. Can you hear me okay?
Very clear, Rick. Thank you.
All right. I'll group these together as Tammy mentioned, and then stand for questions, or if you'd like to make a motion to on the items. But items 19 through 22 are statutory requirements for approving master plans prior to the upcoming submittal of capital projects to the board for consideration in the governor's budget. Note that the capital projects, the campus master plans were approved in part a couple years back, but we didn't include program and enrollment driven needs at that time because our SBHE strategic planning wasn't complete, and we wanted to make sure there was alignment with that. So these master plans are coming forward now with the program and enrollment driven needs, and as there are projects that reflect that, they require your approval prior to the consideration of those projects. But note as well that approving the master plans is not an approval of the project per se. With that, with that brief explanation, I'll certainly stand for any specific questions you might have or further action you'd like to take.
Any further questions of Rick?
Chair Morton, this is Greg. I would move approval of items 19 through 22.
Second, Casey.
So 23 through 27 will be separate?
That is correct, Chair.
Pardon?
Mr. Chairman, 23 and 27 will be done separately.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the vote, Christie.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Dr. Malaker?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Yes. Okay, Rick, are you still talking to us?
Yes, I am, Chair Morton, members of the committee. Items 23 through 26 are construction projects that require the board's approval, and the Budget Finance Committee heard those issues. They're relatively straightforward and have no significant consequence. Item 27 is a request for fundraising, permission to raise funds by the NDSU Ag for a new greenhouse up at the Williston Research Extension Center. The funding is for the construction projects is listed both in the on your agenda and in the summary documents if there's any questions. But again, with that very brief explanation, I'll stand for questions, or if you'd like to consider a motion.
Any questions of Rick? Hearing none, is there a motion?
So move approval.
Approval
Second,
of
Casey.
23 through 27, correct?
Can 27 be a part of this?
That's correct. It may be.
Okay. There's a motion to approve items 23 through 27. Is there a second?
Second, Casey.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the vote.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Dr. Malaker?
Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Yes. Okay, board policy, item number 28. Jane?
Good morning, Chair Morton, members of the board. Today I'm bringing forth 3 HR policies pertaining to leave. and that they need a clarifying statement requiring employees to record leave via our electronic HRMS system. The policies effective are HR Policy 6 annual leave, HR Policy 7 sick leave, and then HR Policy 12, which is overtime. Each policy has an added statement requiring employees to use the HRMS absence management system and or the time and labor system as it relates to Policy 12. These updates were made to align the policies with the current way that employees request leave. In the past, it was a manual process. Over the course of the last 18 months, campuses have transitioned from the manual process, and now all campuses are using the HRMS absence management system called TLAB, Time, Labor, and Absence Management. Are there any questions regarding these changes?
Any questions of Jane? Nick Vaughn, do we vote on each one of these individually, or can we put them together at the end?
Mr. Chairman, I would at least take first readings together and then second readings together if you were going to do that.
Chair Morton?
Yes.
I don't mean to interrupt, Nick. I guess this one seems very straightforward. I would make a motion to approve first reading and waive second reading.
Is there a second?
A second.
Second, Casey.
Kevin beat you, Casey.
Fine.
Any discussion? Hearing none, call the vote, please.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Yes. Item number 29. Lisa?
Yes, Mr. Morton, members of the board. Policy 1202.1 is really just a clarification and tightening of the language around inappropriate use of communications, where the languages had changed from not knowingly impersonating an individual to adding language that says it is illegal to impersonate another individual with the intent to deceive or cause harm. And this change sort of came, just a little bit of brief background, as when we assign email addresses, we've generally used a legal first name, last name, so my email address is lisa.johnson. But we have an example in our room today. When we use that formula, for example, if you wanted to reach Phil Wisecup, you would actually have to know to search under the name James Wisecup to identify him. And so the decision was made to allow, with some consistency, that campuses could assign email addresses using a preferred or chosen name. And so that we could assign email addresses to Phil Wisecup. The reason we chose to just strengthen this language is because it was in some rare instance, if someone wanted to impersonate another individual, for example, to change my chosen or preferred first name to Larry and my chosen or preferred last name to Scogan, and then distribute communications under our university system email address. The purpose of this language was to be able to conduct action in response to a person using email or communications inappropriately. I just lay out that scenario as the background to this additional clarification to policy, excuse me, 1202.1. Presented to you today for first read.
Okay. Any questions of Lisa?
Board Chair, Lisa, I have a question on the chosen name. Can the chosen name, is it restricted to just the first name of the individual?
Board Member Melkert is not restricted to only first name. We do permit students via their student information system to change first name and last name. But what we have some control over is where and how we present that in our communication. So for example, class rosters are easy to have a preferred first or last name. We are very careful not to use a preferred or chosen name in financial documents for which there might be fiscal transactions or financial aid awarded to those students. But there's growing desire, and the representative from the Student Association can attest to this, there's growing desire to use preferred or chosen first and last name in more instances that we are researching what other systems and other schools are doing in this regard.
I'm probably very much in favor of chosen first names. That doesn't concern me. I'm struggling a little bit with changing last names of individuals, or chosen last names. And maybe it's just me, or maybe it's just I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, but still, I think if we have some restrictions on last names, at least we can follow the individual. What's that?
I apologize for interrupting. So we permit students to change a first name. On a last name, we've had as a safety check that requires communicating with someone at the institution regarding the scenario in which they're changing their last name, their preferred last name. Maybe it might be a student who's transitioning. Otherwise, we would require legal documentation if they were changing a legal last name. But that safety check is to have a conversation at the campus when changing that last name, that preferred last name, having a conversation with somebody in IT or a student affairs office. We also have Jerry Rosted here today. As I'm losing my voice, I'm going to defer to Jerry Rosted for additional questions, who's been working maybe more closely on this related to preferred last name. Jerry?
Yeah, just Board Member Malacher, Chairman Morton, everybody else. Some of the common situations occur with people that have hyphenated last names. I might be Jerry Rosted Johnson, and I go by Jerry Johnson, but it shows up as Rosted-Johnson in your legal name. So I want to change my preferred name to just Johnson, just to make that simple. And so that it's surprising how often that actually is occurring in our system. And so that's really one of the primary drivers. And we will have the ability, we'll set it up so that someone can't just go in and change their last name online, in their dorm room. They'll have to either talk to, if they're an employee, they'll have to go through their HR office, or if they're a student, they'll go through the registrar to make those changes.
Okay, thanks for answering my question. I wasn't sure exactly how changing last names would work, but I fully understand it now with hyphenated names and with other last names that are out there. But I just thought initially it would be more difficult, and it should be more difficult to change the chosen last name than the first name.
Chair Martin?
Yes.
This is Nesset. Chair Martin, I guess I want to follow up on Dr. Melliker's question there, because I have the same concern when we're talking about changing last names. Maybe you can just give me some clarity. Is this the ability, no legal name change? This is just a desire to change your last name in the system? And I question if that's a wise road to go down.
Chair Morton and members of the board, this is Lisa Johnson. We are starting to see this as a national trend with some support from this coming from ACRO, the kind of a well-respected organization that manages student records. I just don't think we're going to see an onslaught of students asking to change last names. I think the scenario that Mr. Rosted described is probably most common, handling these hyphenated last names. And I think none of us have we haven't had a lot of trouble even with allowing students to change a first name without having to do any check. That, like I said, they're permitted to do that today through the student information system. I think what we're being asked to consider, and nothing's being presented for the board's consideration today, but is to the extent that we would use that preferred name in other scenarios besides a class roster. And so I can point to the University of Wisconsin, who's probably far ahead of us in this regard. They use preferred names in things like transcripts, diplomas, but where they draw the line, they're very clear that it is not used for areas, especially regarding use of state or federal funds for the disbursement of financial funds or money.
Chair Morton, this is Jane Grindy. Can I add something?
Please do, Jane.
Thanks. Member Nessett, I can understand your concern and question, and I'd like to further clarify that the official record, which lies in HR, must have the legal name on file. For example, if somebody has a life change event and they want their name changed from a payroll standpoint, what's going to be on their W-2, so on and so forth, they must present a Social Security card that has their official legal name. So the HR record still will have that legal name on file. And I guess the preferred name, there already is a function within HR departments and HRMS where an employee or student can go into their employee self-service, I'll speak for that, and change their preferred first name so that so that communications could have that first name, but the last name from an HR record is the legal last name, which is on their Social Security card.
If I could add, a group that I really go to for information would probably be our student records. These are the people who have to kind of manage records, and that I thought would be most concerned about that. Our support of this, developing lists and deciding where is it appropriate to only use legal name and where is it appropriate at times to permit students to have a preferred name, such as a class roster, residence list, dean's list, things like that that don't have that financial connection to it.
Thank you very much, Lindy and Ms. Johnson. I guess my concern continues is that, for security, sure, we're talking about all issues that are very germane, but what about, security issues? So I still reserve a concern here. Maybe I just need more information, but thank you.
Yes.
Any other discussion? This discussion has clogged my memory. Do we have a motion on the floor?
Mr. Chairman, you do not, no.
Okay, is there a motion around item 29, policy 1202.1?
Chair Martin, I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second, Casey.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve policy 1202.1. Please call the vote. Is there a further discussion? I'm sorry.
I still have some reservations very similar to board member Nessett, and I maybe need to be more convinced that this is a good idea to allow people to decide what they want to use for their chosen name for their email address. But this is just the first reading, so at the second reading, Lisa, if there's a chance where you can provide some more information about that, and maybe we can have some further discussion. But yes. I just think that if we allow this to happen with last names, it's going to be much more difficult to track, let's say, cyber incidences or any sort of issues like that. I understand the hyphenated issue. I understand the, people changing last names for life changes, divorces, or marriages, or things like that. But I don't know if allowing our students to change their last name and put anything in there that they want for a chosen name makes an awful lot of sense to me. But again, this is just a first reading, so we'll have some further time to talk about it.
Yes, sir. I understand your concern, and we will bring additional information.
Dawn, can I?
Right.
This is Birgit. I'm wondering if we are requesting additional information, whether we could put international students in there. because I can kind of see where that would be a real difficult thing to do. If somebody has 4 or 5 last names, they may just choose one for their email instead of expanding it.
Yes, we will address that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions or discussion? Hearing none, please call the vote.
Dr. Meliker,
Yes.
Mr. Steeman,
Yes.
Ms. Nesset,
No.
Mr. Ness,
Yes.
Dr. Ryan,
Yes.
Board Chair Morton.
Yes. Moving on to item 30, policy 1202.2. Jerry's going to substitute for Darren. Jerry?
Chairman Morton, members of the board, what we are proposing here is the development of a policy that relates to incident response when it comes to IT security or IT incidents that are involved. And we want to have a standardized process to report and any incidents that occur so that we're all consistent with the requirements of an incident that might occur at an institution. So this really just puts in play a policy related to that.
Thank you, Jerry. Any questions of Jerry? Hearing none, do I hear a motion?
Second reading, I so move approval.
Second, Casey. Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion around item 30? Hearing none, please call the vote, Christy.
Mr. Ness,
Yes.
Dr. Ryan,
Yes.
Dr. Meliker,
Yes.
Ms. Nesset,
Yes.
Mr. Steeman,
Yes.
Board Chair Morton.
Yes. Item 31, Tammy?
Thank you, Chair Morton. Item 31 is the second read of changes to policy 804, which deals with equipment and personal property leases. The current policy outlines a process whereby all leases have to be analyzed, and it's a very detailed process to determine whether they're capital or operating leases. And then there's some other required reporting in there. In recent years, computer cloud hosting arrangements have become much more common. We're using them more frequently. After consulting with various procurement officials in GASB and the State Auditor's Office, we are suggesting adding language related to computer cloud hosting arrangements. And if they meet the 2 criteria whereby the institution does not have a contractual right to take possession of the software at any time during the hosting period without incurring significant costs, and it is not feasible to run the software on the institution's hardware or contract with another party unrelated to the vendor to host the software, that these types of arrangements would be excluded from the need to go through this lease analysis. This saves time for leases we know aren't going to end up, aren't truly the type of leases we're talking about here. So it just makes the process more efficient, and it determines up front that these criteria, if the criteria are met, they don't have to go through the analysis. Are there any questions on that?
Any questions of Tammy? Is there a motion around item 31?
Move approval. Casey. Move approval.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Kevin. Any further discussion of item 31? Hearing none, call the roll, please.
Dr. Meliker,
Yes.
Ms. Nesset,
Yes.
Mr. Steeman,
Yes.
Mr. Ness,
Yes.
Dr. Ryan,
Yes.
Board Chair Morton.
Yes. Item 32, Tammy?
Chair Morton, if you'd be okay with it, I'd like to take items 32 through 38 as one discussion item, similar to what we did on the first read at the last meeting. because they all relate to the implementation of the tuition model, and they're fairly interrelated.
Great idea. Please proceed.
Okay, so item 32 is policy 805 related to tuition. And I went through that in some detail at the last meeting. Since that time, well, what the policy does, it has all of the necessary language to implement the tuition model. We've made other changes, added language that used to be in other policies, streamlined everything, and now have everything related to tuition in one policy. There was one slight change since first read. We received some additional feedback from the Academic Affairs Council regarding the changes. They requested that we remove references to specific delivery methods as they relate to tuition rates charged to high school students taking college coursework. Excuse me. The changes which I have highlighted on the versions that were on the agenda provide additional flexibility to the campuses to utilize their varied delivery methods but do not change the intent of this tuition policy. So in section 5, the additional change is to remove some parenthetical language that wasn't needed, and then just to remove words that say that limit the high school courses to those that are taught in classroom setting at a high school with an institutional instruction mode of off-campus face-to-face or face-to-interactive video. So that just provides a little extra flexibility for the campuses. Agenda items 33 and 34 are policies are being eliminated because they're no longer needed with the changes made in the remaining policies, and that's no different than the prior meeting. Item 35 relates to fees. Again, that wasn't changed from the prior policy from the prior presentation. What we've done here is organize the fees into 2 categories, clarify that course and program fees must initially be approved by the board, and that's because the tuition model minimizes the use of those, but after approval, the presidents may set the fee amounts, and generally that's done on an annual basis. It requires annual reporting of course and program fees to the board so that we can continue the board's due diligence related to tuition model implementation and continue to monitor the dollar changes. Again, that was unchanged from the prior meeting. Item 36 is another policy that's being eliminated because it's already addressed in one of the remaining policies. Item 37 had we're requesting a slight change from the first read version. And again, I've highlighted those changes on the agenda item. All this does is add clarifying language that the board has approved the use of additional waivers of tuition and fees, because this policy relates to waivers, and then requires the institutions to adopt procedures for all waivers offered, and outlines what at a minimum those procedures must address. That includes eligibility, application process, selection criteria, awarding process, and monitoring. And the reason we've done that is the state auditor's office was doing a review of a prior audit that was done to see if we've implemented it. They said that our policy still did not meet their recommendation to require institutions to have these procedures in place. And so we made this change so that we would be in compliance with the audit recommendation. And those changes and the ones that I mentioned to you on policy 805.1, I did run back through the Admin Affairs Council electronically. We didn't have another meeting. And institutions were in agreement with the proposed changes. And then item 38 is the policy on refunds. No change from the prior presentation. And that policy really is just a cleanup of the language. There were no real substantive changes made. So with that, I would take any question on items 32 through 38.
Thank you, Tammy. Questions for Tammy? Hearing none, do I hear a motion?
This is Greg. I move approval.
Casey, second.
Been moved and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the vote.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Malaker?
Yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Yeah, yes. Item 39 is a second reading, and Carol will walk us through this.
Good morning, Chair Morton and members of the board. We are looking at the proposed policy 607.5 that discusses faculty sick leave. We're bringing it back to you with a summary of where we are and what your options might be, and what the prevailing opinions are around this policy. In your materials, we have a little summary that talks about why, it reminds us all why we're considering a single system, which methods of sick leave are being used, how many faculty are affected. The numbers on that, there's a small number of faculty that would be substantially affected. Which stakeholders supported this proposed policy. As you can see, some groups did support the policy, others did not take a position. At the end of my summary here, I want to refer you to the position of the presidents. The goal is to resolve this, and hopefully we can get to a point of resolution. The options as we see them would be first to accept this proposed policy as it's written, as we've discussed in the past. The second would be to accept the proposed policy and add one or more amendments. The first group of amendments, 1 and 2, we've talked about before, which kind of simplifies the language and also allows more flexibility for parental leave. Amendment 2 is a new proposed amendment that has been discussed that would give the campuses an option of using this policy or using the usual state employee leave policy, HR 7, at their option for their campus. Amendment 3 was a suggestion to modify the use of the long-term sick leave to add an accrual component. Obviously, option C would be to defeat the policy, not choose any of those options, and policy D would be to take no action by a lack of a motion or lack of a second, and then it would die. I wanted to discuss briefly that the presidents did ask for an extra month to get more feedback from their faculty, and that is page number, red number 6, where we've given their positions. You can see that several of the campuses either supported the policy or did not object to the policy. Others have other preferences. Their comments are also listed below. I wanted to stress that from the beginning, none of the campuses have been enthusiastically in support of changing their faculty sick leave policy, and that is still the case. And in discussions with the presidents, they do not have a consensus. They each have their own opinion about the difficulty of making a change. However, in the end, it is indeed up to the board to look at the legislative suggestions and determine what you want to do with this. And I believe the Chancellor has a couple of remarks he'd like to add. Chancellor, if you're on the line.
Thank you, Carol. I just want to thank Carol for an enormous amount of work that she put into this this effort, and when you look at the requirements on the campuses to implement this change, when you look at the additional work that our staff may have. And if you look at the fact that it does send a signal, kind of building on Mike Ness's theme, that already we'll be talking here shortly about budgets and other things, that hearing the presidents talking to them, that they're team players, that the board wants to do this, they'll move ahead, but none of them push for this. And so, having worked in a lot of these decision processes in the past, I think a way forward for the board may suggest is just put this on the shelf. We are going to have so much work coming up on the budgets and adjustments to the new realities that for them to have to work through this for meager gains, if some cases maybe negative faculty morale, that, as Carol mentioned, one option may be just take no action. We put it on the shelf. If it becomes a legislative priority, though I've heard from no legislators on this, we can dig it out if the time comes when we have lots of extra time. So again, lots of work, which helped us understand, the potential trade-offs, and in the end, perhaps no shock to probably many of the campuses, in the end, it just doesn't really make a compelling case. So again, it's up to the board, but I would, and presidents feel free to speak up if I'm not capturing this right. They're team players. They'll do their best to implement this, but in the end, nobody pushed this. And if you just put it on the shelf for us to revisit, if there's increased legislative interest, we can certainly pull it back off. But I think at this point, I'd take the last option, just take no action, and we move on to the bigger things on the plate.
Thank you.
Chair Martin.
Yes.
This is Greg. I guess I'm going to go back to, we have, in response to House Bill 1003 and Senate Bill 2003, we've worked hard on the consistency side of things. And sometimes we get to a point where there's one that we probably spend more time on it than what it might be worth. And so I guess I'm going to, following up on what Carol said and also what the Chancellor said, I just don't know if this one, I mean, we have dealt with this so many times, and I credit our institutions for saying, hey, if we need to go along with something, we will. I don't know that this is a hill worth dying on, and I guess what I'm getting at is I'm going to make a suggestion that we, and I guess I'll ask Nick, I'd like to table this indefinitely and have it brought back at the discretion of the university system office once they believe it's, maybe something that's palatable. I know the Chancellor said when we have nothing else to work on. I don't know that in my time here we've had any of that time available to us, but I would just make that motion to table it indefinitely and have it brought back at the discretion of the university system office. Is that an acceptable motion, Nick?
Mr. Chairman, Member Steeman, that would work. Just procedurally, if it's tabled indefinitely, only the board could bring it off the table. Okay. So certainly the system office, if it became an issue that the board needed to bring up again, they could, talk to a board member about that ahead of a meeting. But procedurally, if you put it on the table, much like was done, I believe, last May, it would just sit on the table as a second read until the board decided to bring it back.
So we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Yes, Mike, I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Further discussion? Birgit?
Yes, thank you, Chair Morton, board members. I wholeheartedly support this motion. And from the point of view of the faculty, I mean, first of all, I do want to thank everybody who has put an awful lot of effort into it. I know people in the system obviously, but there was also a task force on it that involved quite some faculty a while ago that put a lot of effort into it as well. So thanks for everybody on that one. Other than that, I really think with the budget items, the budget issues that are facing us, this probably isn't the most important thing. And there is a lot of anxiety going on among faculty and staff already again, what's going to happen in the next legislative session. And I think whatever we can do to just ease that anxiety a little bit and do some things that make faculty feel more comfortable, and there has been a lot of rejection of this policy among the faculty and a lot of concern, I would really appreciate if we could get done with it today.
So you're
Chair Morton, this is Casey.
Yes, Casey, go
I'm
ahead.
supporting the motion.
Casey, go
And
ahead.
maybe
Please.
it might be two things. Are you even allowed to have discussion on a motion to table? That's number one. And number two, why not just defeat this motion and get it out of there? And then if someone wants to bring it back in 2 years, you have the work that's been done, and it can be renewed again, but it can come from the system office, because to me, tabling it just leaves it dangling out there, and if you get rid of it, it sends a stronger message to the faculty and to the presidents. Again, this falls under what you said earlier, Don, about you got to give some leeway to the presidents so they can run their respective institutions in the manner they feel best, which includes recruiting students, it includes retaining faculty, getting faculty. So I would just say, are we better off to just defeat it? I know I can't make a motion, but I just, maybe Nick can respond to that.
Mr.
Nick, do you have a response?
Mr. Chairman, Member Ryan, as I've been peering at my Robert's Rules of Order in between this, but I mean, technically, Member Ryan's correct. When there's a motion to table, you go right to a vote. That said, I thought Chairman Steeman was offering kind of a suggestion. I added some detail about that, and then you all started a discussion, which I think is helpful for the kind of direction of where this is going to go. And as board policy states, the board will generally conform with Robert's rules, so I take that generally liberally. But what I will say is, to Member Ryan's point about having it, I mean, that's a decision for the board. If it's offered up as a vote, meaning is this going to be approved on second reading and there's no motion or a lack of a second, then it would fail, and then we'd start back over whenever it came back up as first reading. But because Member Ryan raised a valid point of order, I think we need to go straight to a vote on the motion to table.
Are there some comments from the presidents?
Well, Chairman, sorry, this is Dick Vaughn again. Because there was a motion to table in a second, and Member Ryan correctly pointed out that per Robert's rules, there can't be discussion. We should now go to a vote on that.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Colonel.
Please go ahead, Mike.
Nick, if we would defeat this motion, could we then have discussion and come back with another motion to table?
Yes, after further discussion, you could do that, yeah.
That'd be my suggestion. I can't say that generally.
Well,
Hey, this question is for Nick. Hey, Nick, this is Nick Hacker. I just joined. I'm not sure what topic we're on. It was on the Emerging Technologies Group. Can I abstain?
That is fine. That will count as a vote. So in the need to have a majority, that would be counted as a vote. But you certainly can't abstain.
Would you like me to disconnect and call back in?
That's a question for you, Member Hacker. But I'll again, I would say that we need to get to the vote since Member Ryan raised a valid point of order.
Well, it looks like we have to go for a vote.
I would just defeat it.
The motioner and seconder could withdraw the
Nick,
motion.
Nick, can you explain the motion and the topic?
Yeah, Member Hacker, the motion is to table 607.5, second reading, with no date to bring it back.
Thank you.
Question for Nick.
Again, Nick, this is Casey. I think once you have a motion to table it, you have to take a vote on it. So I think you had a valid motion in a second, and I think we have to vote on that.
You're exactly correct. We need to have a vote on this. As I've said, Member Ryan raised a valid point of order, so we need to have a vote.
Go ahead,
This is Birgit. I have a question for Nick. I may be misunderstanding Roberts, but wouldn't it be possible for the two people who make the motion and the second to withdraw their motions and move on that way?
Mr. Chairman, Member Bruce, because Member Ryan has raised the point of order, the whole point of going straight to a vote to table is so there isn't discussion for the reasons that someone can withdraw, or any other reason. And so he's raised a valid point of order, and the correct procedure is to call a vote on the motion to table, which has been seconded.
Please call the vote, Christie.
Dr. Malaker?
No.
Mr. Hacker?
No.
Ms. Nesset?
No.
Mr. Ness?
No.
Mr. Steeman?
No.
Dr. Ryan?
No.
Board Chair Morton?
No.
Where are we?
Chairman Morton, this is Casey. I would make a motion that we defeat policy 607.5.
I would second that.
Discussion?
Chair Morton?
Questions? Yes.
This is Mike Ness. I think this was legislative intent, and for us to defeat that, I think is going the wrong direction. I think we should discuss tabling it until we can bring it back to the legislature to tell them why we do not want to make this change. So I would support tabling it until we bring it back, which may be closer to legislative session. I think it's important that this board get together in some way, whether it's a committee or whatever it may be, to put a legislative form or platform together. And this may be one of the things that we talk about. I don't think defeating this motion is the right way to go. I think it's going against what the legislature wanted us to do. So I think tabling will give us some time to look at it.
This is Casey. And maybe Nick can help me on this one. What did the legislature, what did they send, or what statement was made to NDUS or the State Board of Higher Ed in regard to faculty leave?
Mr. Chairman, Member Ryan, if memory serves, I believe the session that ended in 2015 identified data inconsistencies and directed the board to correct through policies inconsistent practices. And one of them was specifically identified as faculty sick leave. This past session, there was another data inconsistencies. Faculty sick leave was not specifically identified. However, I believe annual and sick leave was, just as a general matter for NUS employees. So that is where this has gone from a historical perspective, and what this kind of impetus for a change came from was that language. It was in session law. It's not in statute, but that is what we are working on. So we still have, at least as of June 30th of 2017, a direction to through our policies correct inconsistent practices regarding leave for all employees.
So this is Casey again. How do we go about making a statement that supports what we want to do in a fashion that can be acceptable to the legislature? I mean, personally, I think it's bad policy that every one of the presidents would have to have the same rule. None of the 11 colleges and universities are exactly the same. So why do we try and make them the same? And I think in some way, it matters not to me whether we defeat this motion. I don't think it should be passed. But I think in some way, there needs to be a statement by the State Board of Higher Education that we think there needs to be flexibility to the presidents to decide what is best for their respective institutions. And I mean, sometimes people pass laws and they think it looks good, but they truly don't understand the impact of what they've done. And to me, I haven't read the law, but my the way I see it with what we've discussed, is that it's inappropriate to try and do it.
This is Don Morton. This is Don Morton. I think that was well stated, Casey. I agree. I'm all for flexibility at the campus level. And we also, as a board, we do make decisions around higher ed. Of course, we welcome input from the legislature. We try to partner as much as we can, but we have to look out what we feel is best for higher ed. And I'm convinced that campus autonomy and campus flexibility is very critical. And Mike, this kind of goes to, which I think you're entirely right, let's do something non-monetary that shows support for the faculty to help address some of these morale issues. And I think this is, and so your idea around tuition, I agree with. And this is something else I think shows, it just seems to be the right thing to do. That's my thoughts. Anybody else?
Chair Morton, this is Greg. I guess I just want to echo your sentiments and at the same time respectfully address Mike's comment. There is legislative intent. I want to go back and repeat what I said. We have worked very hard. Our university system office and staff have worked very hard to address numerous inconsistencies, and we have, in response to legislative intent. What I think is important is that and the reason I recommended tabling is in support of the fact that I don't know that this is a policy that we should act on in the best interest of our individual universities and our individual leaders. But at the same time, by tabling it, it gives us an opportunity, as Mike addressed, that we can communicate with legislature and say, listen, we've done, I don't want to put a percentage number, we've realized the importance. This one is one that caused more issues and concerns than anything else that we anticipated. We don't think it's worth moving forward on. And my guess is they would be appreciative of at least a meeting and an explanation, and probably also it would allow us to show here's where we've met and stepped up and done the things that they asked us to do. But again, I don't think there's anything wrong with communicating. We can make a statement, but we can maybe communicate it in an effective manner, saying here's why we're hesitant and here's why we'd rather not act on this. By tabling it, we can bring it back and act on it after we've had that communication. But I hope we're sending a message by saying, listen, we don't want to act on it the way it is. We understand and respect the numerous concerns across the entirety of our system. But let's also be respectful and communicate with the people that provided the legislative intent in the first place as to why and the difficulties and the unexpected maybe roadblocks that we ran into. I think we meet all aspects of what we're trying to accomplish if we handle this in a manner where everybody is communicated with and everybody understands where we're at.
Chair Morton, this is Casey. I withdraw my motion.
Who seconded the motion?
I think I seconded the motion. Chair Morton, my concerns are, what is the difference between the motion that we just defeated and the new motion that will be presented?
I don't think there's any difference, but before we make a motion, we can actually have discussion as to why we made the motion. Is that right?
You know, there's been a lot of discussion among us board members. Mike was one that brought it up early in the meeting, and Don Morton certainly referenced it, and I've been thinking about it as well. I mean, we have, with the new legislative session coming up in 2019 through 2021, we are going to have lots and lots of issues to deal with, and we need the support of our faculty, we need the support of our students and our universities to work together towards accomplishing that goal, and to not let the presidents and their individual institutions run their institutions over an issue like this. And in the scheme of things, I think even Carol talked about this earlier. I mean, there's very few people that were affected by the accrual part of it. But in my opinion, we should just move forward and move on other issues, and hopefully we can work together towards the accomplishment of those. And I don't see any difference from the, again, the motion that was defeated in the motion that's back on the floor now. So I'm in favor of Casey's original motion, but I don't know how that works.
Chair Morton?
Yes.
This is Nesset. I just want to bring up one point. I'm in agreement with Dr. Ryan. However, his motion was to defeat the policy. I don't think that's the proper board action, that we want to defeat the policy. There is a policy 607.5 that would stay in place. It would just defeat, I mean, basically we're looking at option D, take no action, or defeat the changes to 607.5.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Chair Morton, I'd be in favor of that as well. If we just took no action and left the existing campuses to run their campus as they run their campus.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is Mike Ness. I agree with that. One thing I think we need to look at is we have new information here. When the legislature was looking at this issue, it's pretty easy to look at the outside and see this as a real problem. Now it's been studied for almost a year, and it has become very complicated and really maybe is not a major issue. And if we would present that as part of our legislative platform, I think they would accept that as the way we need to do business. So I hope we will move ahead with tabling this.
Ms. Casey, I'll go back to what I said. I withdraw my motion, but I think you have to have the second withdraw the second in order to just go back to nothing being said at the moment. Otherwise, if we're going to vote on the motion, I'd recommend defeating it.
Then I guess I would withdraw my second.
Okay, we're back to square one, as clear as mud.
Yeah.
Okay, Chair Morton?
Yes.
I would like to make a motion that we take no action on policy 607.5.
And I second that
Second
one.
that motion.
It's been moved and
Seconded,
seconded. Is there
Casey.
any further discussion?
Question, Chair, is that...
Chair Morton, Nick Hacker.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Nick.
Chair Morton, Nick Hacker. If you would be so kind to just update the interim.
I'm sorry, what? Update?
Be so kind, if this motion passes, if you'd be so...
I think he wants you to update the interim legislative committee on higher ed.
Yes, yes. We lost
Mrs.
Nick.
Casey, oh, excuse me. Mrs.
Chair
Casey,
Morton.
I have a question. If we are going to take no action, do we even need a motion?
Yes, because
I guess that's for Nick.
Mr. Chairman, Member Ryan, I think the intent of taking no action through board action would prevent it from kind of just rolling over to the next agenda, as that's been done previously with items that there is no action taken, that just rolls over to the next agenda. So I think by taking action on this, it would postpone it indefinitely.
Thank you.
We do have a motion in a second. Birgit?
Yeah, this is Birgit again. Could somebody please summarize what the motion to not act now means in detail, particularly relative to the first one that was defeated?
Chair Morton?
Yes.
This is Nesset. I made the motion to take no action on policy 607.5. So to answer Dr. Cruz's question, that means that this has been studied, the information is before us. We do not accept the changes, that we continue to acknowledge policy 607.5 as it's on the books.
Excuse me, Chair Morton, Member Nassett, this is Carol Redmond. 607.5 is a new policy. There is no policy on the books, 607.5. So the existing policies at the system level and at the campus level would continue.
So basically, we have to defeat this in order for the existing policy to continue, is that correct?
No, it hasn't been approved.
It's a proposal.
It hasn't been approved, Chair Morton. Motion, Morton, I don't know. I'm gonna work on getting my merit badge in Robert's Rules of Order. And the second thing is, I think along with anything, our system office will update the interim legislative committee. I think that was a great suggestion on Nick Hacker's part, as part of any action we take today. So basically, if we approve the motion at hand, the current policy that leaves all authority in the hands of the institutions would remain in place. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Member Steeman, that's correct.
Okay.
When we're talking about policy, it would be essentially the practice that the institutions have operated under will continue. There's no board level policy on this. So the policy changes is really the creation of a new policy. So by not adopting it, you're just going to allow the institutions to continue operating as they've been operating.
Okay.
And Mr. Chancellor, if I could just jump in, I'll assure everybody we will keep all the records, all the papers. We'll talk to the legislators, and if this is really an issue that they want us to bring back, we'll have everything to bring that back next year. So, and we'll brief the interim.
So does Kathy's motion get us where we want to be? Nick?
Well, Mr. Chairman, that's really a question of does it get the board where it wants to be? I think through discussion, in my view, I think the record is clear. That being said, I'm not a board member and can't speak for the whole board. So if there's no other discussion or issues from the board members, I would call the vote.
Christie, you want to call the roll?
Dr. Malaker?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Hacker votes yes.
Ms. Nesset?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Board Chair Morton?
Yes. Okay, we're going to take I'm going to take a short break. Let's come back at look at your clocks. Let's come back in 7 minutes. For my clock, that's 11 a.m. 7-minute break, okay? Then we'll finish up.
Don, I'm back online. Whenever you want to start, I'm here.
Okay. I'm waiting for you. I don't see Nick Vaughn. Is he back?
Christy, can you hear me okay? Christy, this is Nick Hacker. Can you hear me okay?
Very good, Nick.
Okay, she didn't hear my vote, which I voted yes on the last motion, so thanks.
Yeah, you voted yes, didn't you? Or
Yeah,
no,
correct.
you voted with the majority. That's a safe thing to do. Okay, we will reconvene, call this meeting back to order, and we'll start with the Chancellor's report. Items 40, 41, 42.
Yes, Don, I just wanted to get a couple things done here. I know it's gone a little longer than we thought. And I'll turn it over to Tammy here in a minute. But just to kind of build on what you all discussed, you have accomplished so much, and the staff and the campuses on data inconsistencies. So, yes, we'll be able to go back to the legislature and explain to them the complexities of that one. I appreciate Mike Ness's comments on that. There's a lot of news about the budget and things, but, you're all going to be going to graduations. Thank you again for doing that. The students are getting out on time. We're winning awards. I sat in the governor's governance conference, and I don't know how much you talked about that, Don, when I was in this other meeting, but numerous items came up about, well, what's this system done? And one after the other, we were able to talk about. You established your governance committee to look at improvements. Administrative costs came up in one of the slides. You cut actually 30% more administrative positions than there would be if we had just done across-the-board cuts. They asked about adaptability, new programs to meet changing times. You talked about the Masters in Teaching, joint programs. They came up about efficiencies. We talked about system efficiencies, the Senate Bill 2003, the Blackboard stuff you're going to get briefed on here in a minute. Then one of the members brought up, the complexity of tuition and how does the state handle that. We talked about the new tuition plan, which you've just approved some of the first rounds, but having flexibility. On and on, technology, one of our top online universities. So I want to be sure in this discussion, in case there's press there, that so much good has been going on that people need to keep emphasizing that. And then even on our long-term planning, if people remember in the middle of goodness gracious, the Civil War, Lincoln kept building the new Capitol. People told him, stop doing it, focus on the present. He goes, no, we're building for the long term. And Vision 2030 on the 23rd of May, you're going to have some really neat things to talk about. So lots of positive things. But just as I get into letting Tammy take over on the budget, these are tough numbers. We met with the presidents just 2 days ago, a lot of heartfelt concerns. And I'm already taking a couple actions myself, realizing the number's going to be tight. So I'm not going to fill the chief of staff position. I will keep that and save us some money there. Terry Meyer has done tremendous work, 30-some years of wisdom, and I'm going to make her title of a deputy chief of staff so she can better get things done we need to do. Also, Laura Schrott, is doing such important work that we are adjusting her title to reflect as chief audit executive. So both Ms. Schrott and Ms. Meyer are doing incredible work, and we will, in my office already, start to tighten the belt for our planning. So with that, though, I'll turn it over to Vice Chancellor Dolan to talk about, our constitutional responsibilities as a board to give budget, advice to the campuses, direction, but also work with the governor on his requests. So with that, unless there's any questions for me, I'll turn it over to
Chancellor. This is Chancellor, Chair Morton, Chancellor Hager. This is Casey. Are we allowed to put together our own budget and as a recommendation to go to the legislature?
Sir, Dr. Ryan, that is one of the discussion items. Like I said, the presidents, these are difficult times. We have an absolutely visionary governor who is trying to run the whole state and transform us. But you are the board, and you have a constitutional requirement to submit your budget. But obviously, we want to team and partner with the governor.
Understood. Yes. But if in fact we're the fourth body of governance within the state, and the governor sends a budget to the legislature, which are truly just recommendations because they're always changed, and the legislature makes the decisions, why can't we make our best recommendation, because we're the closest to the universities and the colleges, and I would recommend, and I know it's going to take discussion and more time, that we put together what we think is the best budget for the State Board of Higher Education, or NDUS, and submit that to the legislature so they can have a blueprint of what we think is best, and they can coalesce that into what they hear from the governor's office and what other people in the legislature think. But I don't think we should just take it that, right now we have to start looking at how we're going to downsize. I think we need to decide as a board what's best for the university and colleges, because that's why we were put on the board. So I think on a yearly basis, we should be putting together what we think is our best budget and submit that to the legislature, and then work with, lobbying and whatever else we have to do, and then work with whatever comes out of the legislature.
Well, thank you, sir. Again, you are the board, but we want to work closely with the governor. For example, this meeting that Member Hacker was on, the governor helped convene this group, the Emerging Technology Working Group, to help think of ways to get more support for university research and workforce. And so we definitely want to be good partners with him, his staff. But you do have a statutory requirement to submit, your budget. And so what you've said is not correct. It'd be really more of a policy question of how much do you want to align with the governor, and I'll defer to Ms. Dolan, sending up, options to a budget, and she knows better on the technicalities of how one can do that. So at this point, can I defer to Vice Chancellor Dolan on the mechanics, or more discussion or questions?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Tammy? Tammy, are you there?
Chair Morton, I haven't.
Can you hear me?
Tammy's not on the line.
No, I am. Can you hear me now? I think we were muted.
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to start off with, just to give you some context, the round numbers that we're talking about that would be impacted by the governor's guidelines. As you know, he has asked for a 10% base budget decrease, as well as a 3% additional contingency type decrease. And so what that means in round numbers, for our institutions, a 10% reduction in the formula payments is the equivalent of $51 million. The additional 3% reduction is another 15. So in total, between the two decreases, we would be looking at $66 million of cuts to our institutions, and that's on their general fund appropriation. That would be on top of the approximate $106 million reductions that were taken last session that we're implementing right now. In the system office, which I've included CTS in the system office numbers, that would be, the 10% is approximately a $7 million cut. The 3% is another $2 million. So we'd be looking at a total of approximately $9 million that we would need to reduce out of our system office operations budget. And that does exclude, my understanding is they have excluded our financial aid and grants packages. We haven't seen the exact numbers from OMB yet, but I've been told that those will be excluded from these reduction levels. Governor, so that's our ongoing operations. The governor did leave some room in his guidelines for one-time and capital requests. So that's another area we could ask we could submit requests in those type of areas. So since last Wednesday at 11 o'clock, we've been thinking about and beginning the analysis of what this level of cuts would mean. We have a lot of work to do. Each institution will be working on plans to look at, what would this look like? And so I don't have a lot of details for you yet, but I can tell you that this is an extremely significant reduction that we would be looking at, especially on top of the nearly 20% reduction that we took last biennium. So between the timeline we have right now is between now and June, we would be asking for the board to approve a budget that would be forwarded to the governor. We would be looking to the June meeting for that approval. In May, we will be giving you an overview of the capital project items that are being requested by the campuses. This is consistent with what we've done in prior bienniums. And then in June, we will bring you a budget plan that addresses capital and operating budgets. Between now and then, we have to be thinking about the questions that were raised by Ryan and our constitutional obligation to submit a needs-based budget. So those are questions that we need to be addressing before you take action in June. There's a statutory obligation for us to present a budget to the governor by July 15th. Which is the reason for the June deadline. We've asked and received an extension to that, so we will actually have to submit our budget to OMB in their budget system by the end of August. So between June and the end of August is when the institutions will need to actually get all the information into the state's budget system and into a format that is appropriate and can move forward through that budget system. After that point, we will be having meetings with OMB as well on the budget. That'll happen in the fall, as it generally does. The governor has also asked that we have more of a strategic planning meeting, strategic directions meeting that we're hoping will be scheduled for the end of May after the May 23rd meeting, where we talk about the Envision report and the Envision direction. So in summary, I mean, that's really what I have for you today. I don't have a lot of details because we haven't had a lot of time to work on that yet. But we will be, and we'll be moving forward with that and bringing you something in June. And we can talk about things earlier too, if that, through our Budget Finance Committee, we would work through the Budget Finance Committee as well before it comes to the board. So,
Chair Morton and Tammy, this is Casey.
Questions.
Yes.
Go ahead, Casey.
Roughly, what is the amount that's going to be impacted to if this budget were to go through, what kind of dollars are we talking about to the research universities? I mean, is that roughly two-thirds of the money?
At NDSU, a 13% reduction is approximately 17 million, about 16.9. At UND, including the medical school, that a 13% reduction is about 24.9 million, so just about $25 million.
Okay. Well, I'm going to make a statement here that part of what we're delegated to do and people want to do, and I've heard the governor say this, is you want to have two research universities that can move into the future to become, to be moved to a higher level than where they are right now. And I don't know how we go about agreeing or disagreeing with what's been put out there, but I would tell you that there's no way that's going to happen if those budget cuts go through. They're just incongruent in the way that this state functions and how those two universities function. So, not to be done today, but I think there's going to have to be a lot of discussion about what does this State Board of Higher Education think is the best budget for maintaining what we have or trying to improve what we have And I can't go along with what, us just saying, okay, we're going to see how we have to cut things so we can be in line with what the governor is saying. I think our job is to say what is best for the university system, the colleges and the universities in the state of North Dakota, and how do we achieve it. Understanding that there are always things that can be improved. And that's where tough decisions come in. And maybe there's some things that we shouldn't do within the state that can be appropriately delegated to Big Ten universities. But at the same time, I don't see that going along with what's been put out is in the best interests of colleges and universities in the state of North Dakota. So I'm just going to say that because anything that comes up, if we don't make some improvement on what's out there, I'm a no vote.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is Mike. I'd like to reiterate what Dr. Casey has to say. It's almost exactly what I was going to say, that I don't believe that we can just accept this cut and cut another 10 to 13% on top of the 20% that was cut last time. This time it's really going to dig deep. It's going to take a lot of personnel out, or it's going to take major programs out of our system. And I don't think we as a board should just accept that like we did the last legislative session and say, well, that's okay, we'll live within our means. We have gone through that. We have frozen salaries. We have made major changes in our system. And maybe that is the intent, that people want more changes and they will cut us to a point where we will make changes. But I think as a board, we need to support the system as we have and at least maintain the budget that we have rather than cutting 10 to 13% out. I would suggest that the chancellor and the chair and whoever it may be put together some type of a committee that work on this. And not only the budget, I think we need a legislative platform. We talked today about subsidizing out-of-state tuition. There are just a lot of things that we need to put together, and I hope we can get this done. The time is short, and it'll be before us before we know it. So that's my comment about this.
Okay, we have some other comments here in Fargo. Birgit?
Yeah, this is Birgit again. Thanks to both of you, Casey and Mike. I really appreciate that. I'm seeing a fresh wind around here and I appreciate the board is willing to, at least some members are, to stand up and come up with, try to negotiate us a better budget. I'm seeing many of my colleagues leaving. Guess which ones first? The ones with the largest grants, because they find jobs elsewhere quickly. And I really do not think that the idea of just becoming more efficient is going to do. We already took all the fat last time. This is pulling blood. And if we really want to move into the future, staying the effective system that we are, I think we need to fight for it. And if there is a subcommittee, I would be happy to serve on it as a faculty advisor and representative.
This is Casey again, and I appreciate what Birgit has said. I do think that it's important that we get our message out there as soon as possible, because what's going to happen is that most faculty members do not understand that the governor's budget is a recommendation and you have give and take between the legislature and the governor's office. And so they're going to think, well, this is what's going to happen. And if I have a lot of options and want to look at a change, I'm going to be looking at a change. And what can happen with all of this is that you're going to lose good faculty. We're sending a message that I think is wrong. And we've got to grow. We have to grow things in the state of North Dakota. And the way to do it is to have really good faculty. And so it's not a time where you're going to have a lot of presidents having to figure out how are we going to retain faculty and how are we going to recruit faculty. So I think it's very important what we decide as a board, and the fact that if the board is in agreement with it, obviously we need a majority to agree with it, but I go along with what Mike said. I just don't agree with what the governor has said. That being said, I respect the governor, and he can put out what he wants to put out, but we need to have a strong message as to what we want to put out, what's best for the universities and colleges.
Kevin Melker had a comment. Kevin?
Casey, I agree with you. And if we flip this around a little bit, we've relied on what the legislature has said for how many years, probably as many years as we've been in existence. And it's maybe time for us to take the bull by the horn and do some investments in our own, do some fundraising in our own, do some things that we can do and not necessarily continue to rely on these budget cuts. For example, last time, actually, and Rick Tonder just helped me with that this coming week, we had 2 projects that weren't advanced forward because of budget cuts. And both of those projects are devastating. One is in Valley City and one is at North Dakota State University. And I'm sure there's more throughout the state. But I read an article, I think, that the governor was quoted in talking about that, where higher education needs to find additional funding sources. And I think he went to Arizona State, if I'm not mistaken, to find out some different ideas that we can do to move that forward. And so I think we cannot rely strictly on the legislature. We need to do some other things within our organization that we can move our campuses and colleges and opportunities for not only our students, but prospective students from other states forward in North Dakota. So I agree with you, Casey, but we can't rely on the legislature all the time. We got to find some more stabilizing ways of handling this.
Chairman Morton, Casey again. Thank you, Kevin, but I think this is where we need to be proactive as a board, pushing what we see as the best agenda for this, the higher education system in North Dakota. I don't think we're ready to make any motions right now about anything we need to do. I do think it needs to be studied, but obviously from what Tammy has said, we have a relatively short timeline. We have to have an answer to the governor's office by July 15th, and that means that, budget finance or whatever other committee Chair Morton wants to put together have to look at it. It's going to take some extra time, but it needs to be done.
Chair Morton, this is Member Hacker, if you don't mind. Tammy laid out kind of the timeline and the process. And Dr. Ryan, this is kind of why we go through the financial stability reports of the campuses in the springtime, which we just did at the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting. I agree with the comments that have been made so far, and it's really going to come down to telling our story. And the only way we're going to be able to tell our story is to have tangible information, including the information institutions will present and put forward to show how deep into the meat and bone these cuts go. And that's what the Budget and Finance Committee meeting generally and historically has done, digests at its next meeting in May. And that's where some of the discussion will be crafted. And I hope a lot of people can tune in, and maybe, Tammy, we should do that one in person before some sort of recommendation comes before the full Board of Higher Ed in June.
Who's next? Any other comments?
But Don, while people are thinking, just one thing I wanted to add about getting the message out. Dr. Ryan mentioned the 2 research universities. We are having an absolute wave of workforce demands in the West. I met with Ron Ness, the Governor's Workforce Development Council, Dave Farnsworth. They're looking up to 80,000 new jobs that are different, higher tech, pipeline, refineries, gasification plants. And so while we focus on the research universities, as one of the very influential legislators in the West said, the West is the goose that lays a golden egg. We've got to have the workforce programs we need. We got to have 2-year programming. We got to have outlets for family members. So really, it's a whole statewide issue, but definitely research universities, Red River Valley, but it's the whole thing.
Okay, I would just remind everybody, this is very early in the budgeting process. And the budgeting process is something we go through every year. Even in good times, we've had governors come in when things are going really good. They've come in and asked us to propose a 95% budget, a 90% budget. So this is early. We do, in the governor, and ultimately the legislature, they cannot, unlike our federal government, you cannot run a deficit at the state level in North Dakota. You have to stay within budget, and so I've said it before, I'll say it again, you plan for the worst and hope for the best, and I think there are some reasons to be cautiously optimistic as we look at the commodities economy. But at the same time, we do have to start to have those discussions. Now, do we want to get in a public fight with the governor? I don't know if that serves any purpose, but I think we can get our points across. The governor and his staff are willing to listen, I think. We also, I understand that we get heat from the faculty that the state board doesn't stand up for the higher ed. But I think there's some work that we can do that can start to move the needle, and at the appropriate time, if we have to become more public, we can certainly do that. We're not in a terrible rush right now. Let's react, but let's not overreact.
Chair Morton?
Yep.
This is John Richmond. Tuition. You've given us a timeline, Tammy's laid out the timeline, and as we start to plan for that, tuition is, and I can only speak for my institution, 40% of our budget comes from the state, 20% from tuition. So I need to understand, I need to have some guidance earlier than potentially May or June on what the board's direction for us and the other institutions, because part of this can be managed with a potential tuition increase if that's the direction we want to go. But as we develop budgets, we need to know what the board wants us in what direction, and we're going to need that very soon in order to build these budgets to meet this timeline. I just didn't hear that in the discussion, and I think it's important that we all have that and understand we need direction from the board in guidance. Maybe it's a range, I don't know, but we need that soon in order to encompass our entire budget.
And I think we can get there soon.
Thank you.
We have to.
And Chair Morton, if I could just jump in response to John. One of the key discussions, we'll probably tee up 5 for the 23rd of May. It is to actually ask for more tuition latitude, as Don was saying earlier, to manage your enterprise. But again, this is one of the limiting factors that I know the campuses have, is the state legislature right now still has a cap of 4%. So that's why we are a little different than government agencies. There's variables our presidents can't control yet. They have an arm tied behind their back, and getting that more flexible in the future, I think, will be one of the key pillars of our discussion on 23 May.
Have the flexibility now. We start to build a budget now. We need the flexibility. I can't wait till May 23rd.
This is Casey again.
We'll start building 10%, 13% reduction then.
Chair Morton.
We don't do that.
Chair Morton.
Go ahead, Casey.
Just listening to this and hearing what President Richmond has said, I think there have to be decisions made before the 23rd of May to help move this process along. I think I don't know how we do it. If you want budget finance to do it, then we can look at it. But the timeline is short, and there's a lot of graduations in there. Presidents are tied up with those, and they're major important events. But if Chancellor Hagerott feels that May 23rd is a date that we can resolve it, then fine. But knowing how things work, I think that there has to be a proposal on the table of what does the State Board of Higher Education believe we need to, best serve the colleges and universities in the state of North Dakota. And I'll go on what I already said. I just disagree with what's been out there, as I think it'll be harmful. And I think there needs to be some sort of answer as to where we stand on this, probably by May 23rd. If not May 23rd, certainly by somewhere early in June.
Chair Morton,
Yes.
this is Tammy again. Regarding the tuition changes, I think each institution is going to be in a different situation. Some institutions, in order, if to balance budgets, they may need to have different increases. Maybe it's higher in one institution and lower in the other. I guess I would suggest that the institutions begin working with whatever level of tuition increases they think they would need to make in order to continue operating, with
I think that's a
certain
good
levels
idea,
of
Tammy.
cuts. So that could be to cover, if an institution felt they needed to cover the entire cut with tuition increases, you might be looking at some substantial numbers, but I think that would be, within their, it would be good information to have as well, as what does that mean, or what could it mean as far as tuition increases go? So I think we would let them decide what level of tuition increases they would need.
Chair Morton?
Very comfortable with that. Yes.
Casey again. I think that's a good idea, other than the fact that the presidents are not in a system where they control the decisions they make, nor are we. And so we can make those decisions, but if the legislature puts another cap on tuition, that's out the window. And so you won't even know all of that until when? After the legislature meets in next year. So I mean, the message before from the legislature has been pretty consistent on keeping tuition down. So I just think be careful in making that as the best recommendation on how to solve it.
I agree, Chair or Member Ryan. You're right. We won't know the answer to that until the end of next April when the legislators are done. However, we do need to know those numbers, though, so that we can present a case to the legislature for why we need that flexibility. And it may help for them to understand the magnitude of the cuts if we're talking about real numbers. But it would point out the necessity for that flexibility if we were working through that. But you're right, we won't know until the end of April.
Chair Morton? At the crossroads of Dr. Ryan's observation and Tammy's, which I'd argue both are correct, I think I would ask that you please remember that your presidents have 300 plus years of experience in North Dakota higher education ultimately. And I think we are very aware of what our legislators do and don't have an appetite for. And that would be a part of any given campus's president's calculations. None of us is eager to lose our job over proposing a tuition increase that would be thrown out. So I think there's a way of accommodating both the positions of Tammy and Dr. Ryan. And as Tammy was just pointing out, it would give a material form to what the implications of the proposed cuts are, and that would be an interesting legislative conversation, but they would have something material to be looking at versus hypotheticals.
Good input. That reminds me, and I apologize, I meant to at the beginning, as we have these discussions and I ask for questions or input, we need to hear from the presidents too, and I haven't made that clear. And the diversity of thought, the diversity of discussion is so positive. Like that, that discussion we just had where I kind of disagree with Mike, but in the end, I listened to his argument, he was right, I voted. So it's good to have, and we need input from everybody, and especially those people that have, they're not 300 years old. Sometimes they act like it maybe, but but they have 300 years of experience.
Some are closer than others.
The chairman is closer than anybody. So go, Tammy, please proceed. Are you done?
Mr. Chair, I didn't have any additional comments. I guess I had said everything I needed to say at that point.
Okay,
we will be working with the presidents. We've already started. We've already had at least one meeting. I'm going to have a meeting with the vice presidents of finance, hopefully next week, to have even more detailed discussions, and that will be an ongoing process, or ongoing steps in the process is continual meetings with these groups, so that we're making the progress we need to present our budget to you.
Yeah, and I think the governor will be all in favor of campus decision making. I think that's just the part of his thinking. I think he's going to be very supportive of our thinking there. Do we move on to item 41?
Chair Morton, can I just ask for clarification, because I don't want to presume anything. I think what I hear you saying is that the campuses can proceed in doing their calculations with some belief in campus-based flexibility for tuition. Am I hearing that correctly? Okay.
With that 4% cap.
Again, we're not political fools.
Okay, SB 2003.
Chairman, I'd go ahead and defer to Vice Chancellor Wisecup on that one to give an update. Phil?
Yeah. Thank you, Chancellor. Chairman Morton and members, the work began nearly 8 months ago, is now positioned to provide a final product that will address the core of issues that the State Board was asked to consider in this SB 2003. The work of the 5 task forces over the past several months has yielded numerous promising outcomes for the system and the state. You should feel good about the efforts and the productivity from the individual task force members, and it has been a very good effort to this point. This interim report provides an outline of what will be the concluding report in June. Time remaining will be used to complete detailed information on each of the recommendations, including steps required to implement recommendations, resources required to achieve outcomes, and guidance on responsibilities. So there should be no expectation for additional recommendation when the final report is completed. And again, that's due on the 4th of June. I can give you an example, okay, of one of the task forces, and of course, Vice Chancellor Dolan is a task force leader, as is Lisa Johnson. But I'll give an example of the task force on articulation agreements linking K-12 and secondary education. And here's a summary, and this will give you a flavor for where they are. John Miller, who's the task force chair, and member Ness, who's a member of this task force. John says, in the final stage of work, the task force will finalize recommendations in the following areas: approval and publication of feedback from college faculty members at BSC, Valley City, State, and WSC concerning the newest K-12 standards, focusing on those learning elements and skills essential to success after high school. Approval of a generalized job description for the transition counselor, along with recommendation that a common advising guide be developed and implemented to assist in training as a resource for transition counselors. Consideration of budget recommendations for funding of FTEs to support at least one transition counselor for each NDUS member school. Work needs to continue in expanding and improving alignment between 2-year and 4-year colleges in the system, particularly in the CTE areas, and expand a pathways document that includes the regional four-year schools would help each student formulate a better plan for attainment of a bachelor's degree and would serve to reduce transferability problems from students moving from two-year to four-year school in the system. Whether it be from this task force, this is again John Miller, or from the task force focusing on CTE education, the expansion of stackable credentials, industry certificates merits additional discussion. Attainment of stackable credentials allows a high school student to receive additional recognition and review in the area of credit for prior learning. So I could give you this type of summary in shared services, shared administration, centralized processing of student admissions, and centralized services, and that type of thing if you want, but yeah, I know that in the interest of time, you may not want to go down into that level of detail. If this interim report exists, I can make it available to all the members if you'd like.
Thank you, Phil. Any questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
This is Mike. I guess my question is related to the next meeting. Will we have the consultants there, and how will we deal with this? Our committee that Phil just talked about asked for some legislative changes. What is the plan on how we will try to implement these changes with the next step? Is it the May meeting we will have them here for an extended period of time to talk about this, or how will we go through these and decide which ones we are going to try to implement?
Is the Chancellor still on the line, or Phil, or Tammy, can you answer that question?
Sure. This is the Chancellor. I'll just make one point is obviously we can't do everything that 5 different task forces will recommend, but we have the 2 kind of deliberative opportunities, and the one that will be after the Commission report is the Envision retreat on the 27th of June. So probably the top ones where we think we have to grapple with them, the board can talk about them. The ones that are kind of clearly make sense to do and are more, just kind of the functional level of working with legislatures, maybe we don't have to take up time. But if there's some that are going to require more deliberation beyond what the working groups have worked up, then we have a natural alignment on the 26th of June. But again, things that fall below kind of controversial level, I think we would just work to implement, work with the interim committee on if we require some legislation or budget support, for example, on shared services. That's my thought. Phil or Tammy, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, Chairman Phil here. We're going to talk to the consultants on the 21st of May as we prepare for the meeting on the 23rd of May, and so we can ask this question and see, check on their availability, Member Ness, to be able to talk more with the consultants at that point.
Anybody else? Okay, how about Blackboard? Who's going to cover Blackboard? Is that Jerry?
Yes, I can take that, Chairman Morton. As we discussed earlier with the Governance Committee report, the single instance of the Blackboard continues to be stable. It's delivering high levels of service to the end users. As I think it was talked about before too, the infrastructure had been completely changed to bring the performance and stability to its current levels. As we look to the future, back in May of 2016, the State Board action required all NDUS institutions to use a single LMS instance, and we're still charting in that direction. If we wanted to do any kind of changing, it would seem that the State Board would require to take some action on that. Right now, North Dakota State University and UND have stated that they want to they don't want to participate in the single LMS, and they'd like to go on their own instance. There might be 1 or 2 others, institutions that are also exploring it, but we haven't received any official position on that. If the board were to take action in this direction, it would erode some of the fiscal and operational efficiencies that were originally envisioned with the project. But it's technically possible to do so, and there could be we could retain some advantages to the end user. and I'm pinch hitting for Darren King on this, but it's his recommendation that we continue the course, continue down the course that we are on with the modified migration. This will allow us some time to work with NDSU and UND to adequately explore any of the issues that are continue to be unacceptable, and look to maybe a fall time period, September, to revisit this. We certainly couldn't make any changes right now that would allow us enough time to be ready for the start of the fall semester.
Thank you, Jerry. And in the broader discussion around campus autonomy and campus flexibility, this is something we will have to address down the road too, I think, as the board is IT, and when you have the two research universities that are at such a different scale, there's definitely technical differences that come into play, and so those are, as we move to giving more and more autonomy, and I think that these are some other issues that we will have to address as a board too.
Chairman Morton, members of the committee, Mark Kennedy from UND. We had an opportunity to meet with Darren King earlier in the week, and we concluded that UND really wants to transition in spring. As Jerry said, that there's probably not enough time for us to transition in fall to our own independent instance. But we really are going to need to have board approval to do that, if not this meeting, at one of the next meetings, in order to have sufficient time for us to be transitioning to our own instance in January of next year. And I'm happy to talk through the pros and cons of one instance versus three, but as we've said from the beginning, we think having separate instances for both us and NDSU is the better approach for the system.
We can make that an agenda item at our next meeting.
That would be great, and we'd be prepared to respond to whatever other questions there may be related to this issue.
Great.
Hi, Board Member Morton.
Yes.
This is Ms. Hacker, and I'm very interested in hearing more about that. And I do know that we've talked about Blackboard in maybe multiple committees, but I do know that it has been brought up in governance. Maybe that would be a good place to kind of run it through a committee, if you might want to consider that, so that it would streamline maybe the discussion at the board level.
Sure, is that something you're
and Mr. Chancellor, I would thank Member Hacker for that, because that's one of the innovations of governance, was to get a subcommittee that can deal with these increasingly complex, including privacy issues, which you read about recently. So thank you, Member Hacker, for volunteering to help with that.
And I just want to, maybe I'm in the minority, and if I am, but as we address all these issues, I just want us to keep campus flexibility and campus autonomy in mind. To me, that's a key principle for us going forward. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. What's next? Are we done with the Blackboard, Jerry?
Unless anybody has any more questions, Chairman.
Any questions? We do have some other reports, and we have some people, I think, waiting patiently by. We'll start with our Student Association. Caleb, are you still with us? NDSA? If not, Deborah, are you with us? CCF?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. I just have a brief report on our meeting of April 3rd. We did have our faculty staff summit on April 13th. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. We had our faculty staff summit in Bismarck on April 13th. I would say it was very successful. The schools were there, the research schools, the 4-year schools, the 2-year schools, the staff, the faculty. We all sat around a big table at the Capitol, and it was just a really positive, upbeat, forward-looking meeting. It was extremely good, and I hope that we made the Envision 2030 document better. And I want to especially thank Dr. Haggart for kind of really pushing us into having this summit. Phil Weisskopf was great. We had a lot of questions, and he was always there with a fast answer. Shauna Schwartzbauer was there to help us with how to do mileage, that type of thing, just all of that food, all of that. And Chris Erickson from the North Dakota University Systems office guided us through the process. It was about 4 hours, and he did an excellent job. It was a terrific meeting, and I got to be honest, we weren't too excited about having it. We had it, and I think it was really, really positive. I'd like to have a chance to do it again. I also have a reminder that we had said last fall that the Council of College Faculties was going to do a report card on the State Board of Higher Education meeting. We're working on that. We should have that available to you at your next board meeting. We also wrote a letter of concern in April about the Bismarck State College Saudi Arabia partnership, and that was sent to the board. I believe you got that probably April 5th. We did discuss, there was a lively debate about the UND Pearson partnership, so that agreement was discussed, but ultimately the council, although we were pretty split, we decided to take a wait-and-see position and did not vote to send a letter of concern about the UND Pearson partnership. So we're moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Deborah?
Well, Chair, if I could just compliment Dr. Dragons and her team, because if you remember, they drove out on the hope that massive snowstorm would miss them. It was a brave bet. They are gamblers after all, and it missed us, not by much. It's the one that shut down South Dakota. So thank you again for making that meeting happen.
Anybody else? Let me just, at some point, you mentioned Bismarck State College's arrangement with future arrangement with Saudi Arabia. I haven't responded to your letter yet. I will. Personally, I'm fully supportive of that, and I commend Larry Skolkin for driving this. This is exactly what we're talking about. It's looking at revenue opportunities in service, and Saudi Arabia is our strongest ally in the Middle East. They're buying a lot of airplanes from Boeing. They do a lot of commerce with us, and I think it would be very foolish for us as I'm speaking personally, but at some point as a board, if Larry does win this contract, we'll have to approve it. I'm going to be all for it, but I'm just one board member. Thank you. Let's see. Rita, are you on?
I am. I'm here. So first I just wanted to kind of go back a little bit and update you on what we've been doing as State Staff Senate. You should have received all of your individual updates, and again, as always, I encourage you to go through them. It's a great look at what's been going on our individual campuses. Many of the individual campuses either have been going through elections for new officers or are going to be doing that within the by end of May or June. So that'll change a little bit. We're also still planning our annual summer retreat. It's going to be held in Mayville on June 19th and 20th. At that point, we'll have new membership and new officers for State Staff Senate as well. I personally will transition into the past president role at that point, and our vice president will move into the president's role. As Deb had mentioned, we did all attend the Envision 2030 Summit at the Capitol on April 13th. And really what I took away from it, kind of echo a little bit of what Deborah said, but just a great opportunity to work together. I don't think we have a lot of opportunity as staff to really sit around a table with faculty and discuss things that are going on. It was a really just encouraging opportunity or event to be a part of, to really find that our focus is really on the students, that's what it's all about. You know, you could have walked in, we kind of talked to each other, you could walk in the room and you wouldn't know if it was a staff member from a 2-year institution or a faculty member at a research university who was talking just based on the subject of this discussion. So it was really a really good opportunity. You know, we had originally planned on spending that last hour to break apart as faculty and staff and kind of discuss issues in our respective areas, but decided that the conversation was just so good and so worth having that we stayed together as a group. Got through a lot of the pillars. Probably could have gone even longer on a lot of them, some great input. I know you'll get that back. I did just want to highlight real quick a couple of the pillars that we talked about and some things that we had maybe focused on as educational providers. some things that maybe were missing or could be expanded upon. So there's the manufacturing pillar, but nowhere else in there was really a mention of skilled trades that are going to be a necessary part of our workforce when you look forward to 2030 and what's going to help make North Dakota stronger. The area of law really only covered attorneys and didn't cover any other aspects of the criminal justice system. And some areas of that we have programs relating to would be law enforcement officers, court support staff, or those working in corrections. Another area of health focused primarily on the nursing shortage, and I understand that there's another task force dealing with that they're kind of relying on, but some areas to raise just as opportunities for us as educational providers to prepare the workforce going forward that are going to be very much in demand by 2030 would be areas of mental health and addiction counseling or addiction and recovery to focus on. As far as the student issues, we had a lot of great discussion on those as well, including one that was probably the most discussion around was the diversity pillar and what really is diversity and how do we support it in all different areas. So yeah, some really great conversation, and we really could continue to go on that a lot more. And it was great to have the opportunity to have input on that from the staff perspective too. So now we'll look forward, and I know there's been a lot of discussion about the budget, and obviously that's going to be a big topic of discussion. We absolutely understand as staff that this is really the first step, and a lot can change and will change. But I do want to bring again to your attention the impact that just that single announcement has on morale, and the impact that it is already going to have or already has been having, because we did suffer through that 20% reduction. And from the staff perspective, it was a lot of do more with less mindset. You took on more responsibilities with what we thought at the time was no pay raises. Now, of course, thanks to all the work that's been done over the past few months, we're hoping to be able to get some recognition for that. But going forward and saying we have to do it again is just really just a drag. I don't know how else to put it. So just to be aware that employees are once again worried about losing their jobs through no fault of their own and what they're going to go through, and then those who stay through, having to do more again with less, again, is just not a good workplace environment to be in. Leads to problems ultimately for that student when things are delayed or slowed down. So I know you're going to continue working on the budget and on things going forward. So I just wanted to reiterate what impact it is having on staff, so you can keep that in mind as you prepare and go forward.
Thank you, Rita. Any questions of Rachel?
Chair Morton, this is Andy.
Yes.
And I would just like to follow up with something that Rita said too. I know that we are all concerned about budgets and so forth, and that tends to be something that's on the radar screen for all of us. But I just want to take just a minute to recognize some employees, if I could, and those are a lot of employees that are across the university system. Yesterday, as many of you know, was the Administrative Professionals Day. I just want to take a little time to thank them across the university system. They're in our departments and our divisions across the university system. They're professionals that do their jobs every day, just like we all do. They support each college, university, division, department, offices, and so forth. There's hundreds of them across the university system. They file, they organize, they keep our supervisors or supervisors on track as far as schedules go. They remember to make us coffee too in the mornings if we forget. They do all kinds of things, and I just want to make sure that if you haven't given time to thank one of the administrative professionals in your office, division, or area, make sure that you do so today and in the future as well, because they are very integral parts of this university system across all 11 campuses. That's all. Thank you.
Good remarks. Thank you, Andy. Anybody else? Okay, we are into public comment. Do we have?
Mr. Chairman, we have someone here in Bismarck.
Okay. Would that person introduce themselves and proceed?
Very definitely. My name is Andrew Alexis Barvel.
I am an alumnus of the University of North Dakota, class of 1996. My majors at the time were geology and history, and I'm also the winner of the Merrifield Award on research paper in 1997. One of the areas of expertise I do have is the early history of the University of North Dakota. I am here to ask the State Board of Higher Education to rescind permission for the University of North Dakota to demolish the buildings of the former Wesley College, which include Robertson Hall, Sayre Hall, Corwin Hall, and Larimore Hall. At the very least, I request a postponement until May 1st, 2019, which would be during the legislative session. And by the way, I think as a matter of policy, the board should make it a policy that any building demolitions here on out should be during the legislative session. I think this is a very important matter of policy in general, not simply a matter of what happens to the former campus of Wesley College. Wesley College is significant. It is architecturally significant. It is historically significant. Culturally significant, and yes, it is politically significant. It is one of UND's claims to fame that there was an affiliation agreement between the University of North Dakota and what had been Red River Valley University. It was brought to Grand Forks as Wesley College, which would allow students at state universities to take classes in religion and have mutually accepted credits between Wesley College and the University of North Dakota. This was partial curricula, and this spread like wildfire all over the country. This is one of UND's claims to fame. Now, there was a loser in this. While President Merrifield in early 1900, during a dinner party that he hosted for college presidents all over North Dakota, he looked across the table and asked President Edward Robertson, "You should be here with your college. This is where you belong." This started about 5 years of hard sell of President Webster Merrifield doing everything he could to bring what was at the time Red River Valley University to Grand Forks. But I will also point out, if this had not happened, it is almost certain that this college would have gone to Bismarck. And yes, in January 11, 1905, the Bismarck Daily Tribune formally requested that
What kind of is that? Oh, Trajan.
formally requested that college go to Bismarck.
Could somebody mute their phone, please?
This one. It's almost on?
No. We're hearing a lot of noise come through. We're trying to hear the speaker.
Society weighed in.
You might want to repeat that.
I have one question. Has the State Historical Society weighed in on this issue?
Yes, absolutely yes. And the State Historical Society opposes demolishing them. They were asked about it, and they regard it as historically significant. I believe it is the opinion of the architectural historian, Mrs. Lorna Meidinger, that these should be on the National Register. These are architecturally significant. There have been rediscoveries been done in the past few months. The acoustic properties of Corwin Hall, which was a music hall that brought in top-notch violinists, pianists, opera singers from a little over a century ago. There are coffered ceilings that had been masked by drop ceilings. There's terrazzo and mosaic floors that had been masked by carpet. And there are traces of Greek key pattern painted on the walls. It's a cultural treasure that I'm asking to have saved. But also, there are so many overtones to this. Wesley College itself was promoting interfaith dialogue among Catholics, Protestants, and Jews. There were people, it was promoting the idea that different faiths could get along. And yet, when it conferred degrees in religion, not everybody who graduated became a Methodist minister. It included 2 Jewish rabbis, a Presbyterian minister, a Lutheran minister, Congregationalist ministers. And by the way, this affiliation agreement became the basis for future affiliation agreements, not only all over the country, but also the Newman Center's affiliation agreement for a while that started in 1926 between the Newman Center and the University of North Dakota. So yes, very definitely the State Historical Society has, I believe, already weighed in on this, and any other questions on that?
Any other comments or questions?
Chairman Morton, members of the board, this is Mark Kennedy from the University of North Dakota. As the speaker says, there's a lot of history at Wellesley College, and that is why we have gone through a process to make sure that we've historically documented everything. We have also, before we received any of these concerns, have set about a path to retain some of the architectural elements of the buildings prior to demolition with an intent to have a memorial to Wellesley College on that site when we do further construction. So we would clearly oppose any delay in the demolitions, but as it relates to both the historical documentation and our interactions with the Historical Society, I'd like to ask Michael Pieper, our Associate Vice President for Facilities, who I believe is on the line, to provide some further background for the board's consideration.
Yes, we made the request to the State Historical Society. They did recognize historical significance, recommended a thorough documentation as a remediation of that, and that's what we've been doing over the last few months, 3D scanning of the buildings, working with faculty and students. A lot of the things mentioned earlier that were uncovered were part of this discovery process. So we are fulfilling that request from the State Board for Historic Buildings.
And why don't you talk, if you could, Mike, about the foundations and really how poor of shape these buildings are in and how costly, not only costly it would be to remediate them, but how that would add relatively little value given the structure of the buildings.
Sure. Back in 2015, I believe, finished in 2016, the university hired ISIS Corporation to do facility condition index of all its buildings. Both buildings were very poorly rated. The amount of money to bring them back to just deal with deferred maintenance from over the years was $8.8 million. And it kind of goes also, we have some buckling in the basement on one hall, but it kind of goes to our space utilization also. We have slightly improved our space utilization. We hover around 60%. That's pretty average in higher ed. Best in class is closer to 80. And so taking these buildings offline allow us to direct money into some of our other historic buildings, location-wise, meet our academic mission a little bit better in terms of their compactness around some of our other academic classroom buildings.
So we are still moving forward to try to find the resources to remodel Carnegie and Gustafson and Babcock, all of which are very substantive historical significance as well as much of our campus, Merrifield Hall and O'Kelly Hall, which we're remodeling, and the Chesterfitz Library are historical. So we are very significantly conscious of the historical elements of our campus, working hard to buttress, but these buildings are not one that we can suggest anything other than the path we are on.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Well, I do have a few comments on this. I am not recommending that the University of North Dakota be expected to take care of these buildings forever. I do think that among the options I have presented to President Kennedy as well as Chancellor Hagerott include the idea of giving this to a private foundation that would try to do what it could to, and yes, I fully realize that these buildings do have deferred maintenance problems, and that goes back over half a century and possibly something like 80 years. I realize that there are problems and these need to be remediated. I do think that it might be possible for a nonprofit organization to raise money with a greater level of flexibility perhaps than maybe the University of North Dakota has. But I will point out a couple of things also. I'm very, very glad if the University of North Dakota is planning to use elements of the old Wesley College in existing buildings. I would be very glad if it did, because even the various elements that can be salvaged, I think it's a matter of, make it do or do without. I understand that we're on that part. I would be very gratified on that. I'm also gratified on a number of other things. I realize that UND is trying to do the best it can, and it's acting in good faith. I completely agree on that point. What I will say is that Wesley College has a very storied history. UND's relationship with Wesley College has a very storied history, and that this is the sort of building that I think that people in Bismarck would have loved to have, and yes, lovingly restore. I realize that there is a lack of funding, and I realize that UND is trying to do the best that it can. And I applaud the efforts that they're trying to do to keep the campus together. I will say also that given Wesley College's focus on promoting tolerance and interfaith dialogue, and by the way, this is something, this is a matter of, it took a stand, you had the institutional memory of Wesley College, Reverend George Henry, standing up against the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in Grand Forks. This was in April 1924, and I would ask the university administration that although I do not want these demolished, I think it would be better to have them deconstructed, possibly with elements at UND. Another possibility is if there were some way of having them move to the Bismarck area somehow. I'm not sure how that would be done right off, but I do think that if we can look at other possibilities, I realize $8.8 million, that's a lot of money, and I get that. And I think that this is something that I understand that UND is trying to do the best it can. I do ask that UND recognize that Wesley College took a stand, the institutional memory especially, against the Ku Klux Klan at a time when President Kane was a known ally of Halsey Ambrose, who was the exalted Cyclops of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, I'm very, very gratified to hear the other day that a UND official has says, quote, UND is opposed to anything to do with the Ku Klux Klan. Thank you. I like hearing that, because this is something that shows that UND is acting in good faith and that it is parting company with what had happened during the 1920s when, for example, President Kane had proposed to Professor Gillette the establishment of a eugenics department. So I will say that I do ask for the Board of Higher Education to, at the very least, postpone the demolition until this coming year, when the legislature is in session. And this is the key thing: the legislature should know what it is doing, the consequences of its actions. And if they, and I'm not asking that UND keep these forever, but I am saying that we should have the North Dakota legislature know the consequences of its actions. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and appreciate your passion. Do we have any other public people that want to make a public comment?
Chair Martin?
Yes.
May I just ask a question on the speaker there and perhaps President Kennedy? What is the timeline on this demolition? So I find merit in this speaker's plea, so I'd like to know what the timeline is. And are there any options other than waiting to legislative sessions so we don't delay the, or at least don't impede the work that UND must do?
Member Nesbitt, Chair Morton, I believe that this is part of a package of buildings that we intend to take down beginning in the next month or so. And to separate buildings into different packages would cost us additional money. Further, we are planning on relocating our historic stone house and asking for approval from the state and national historical societies onto that location, not necessarily completely taking up what we are here, but that could delay those plans. And again, I think that the speaker's concerns are best dealt with by having this memorial adequately explain and discuss the very significance of Wellesley College. But you're not going to be honoring Wellesley by having very poorly maintained buildings sitting on campus. You're going to honor them by having a new memorial with architectural elements from the Wellesley College buildings that can honor all of the great things that happened at Wellesley College, as the speaker has said. And so we're happy to put forth alternative proposals as to what that memorial might look like, but our strong preference would be to continue forward on the path that we are on.
Thank you. Kathy, further comments? Kathy, any further comments?
No, thank you. But I would certainly continue outside of the meeting and visit on this with both President Kennedy and the speaker.
Okay.
And I would be happy to do so, Member Nesbitt.
Thank you.
Okay. If we have no other public comment, then this meeting can be adjourned. It's adjourned.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
We had the assessment and agenda for next meeting on our agenda.
I'm sorry. Thanks, Mike. It's adjourned. Future agenda items?
Yeah, if I could, for an agenda item. We haven't had an update on the Dr. Feldner lawsuit, and I think it's been a couple of months since we've heard anything on that. I would appreciate us having that on the agenda next month.
Okay. Any other agenda items? Assessment of the meeting and future agenda. Is there any assessment, comments, input, questions? Hearing none, I think we can adjourn. Have a good rest of the day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.